All right, everybody, whoa. It's been a couple of weeks. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I would like to officially call this meeting of the West Hollywood Planning Commission to order. This is a regularly scheduled meeting this Thursday, January 17th.
10B, okay.
I would like to call Mr. Mike Zanello to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if he would be willing to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Just please come up to the podium. Thank you. Secretary Gillett, could you please do roll call for us?
Good evening and welcome back, Commissioners. Commissioner Hoopengarner?
Present, but explaining in advance that I may periodically get up and leave the room because I am carrying a lovely cold and I don't want to sneeze and cough into the microphone.
Thank you. Commissioner Erickson?
Present, and I'm thankful for my seatmate.
Commissioner Buckner?
Present.
Commissioner Bass?
Here.
Commissioner Elchel?
Here.
Vice Chair Carvalero?
Here.
Chair Jones?
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Thank you. Item 4 is approval of the agenda. I'd like to call out to anyone who came to speak on item 10E, which is the 8615 West Knoll Drive item, that this item is being continued to a date certain. This has been noticed as we will be hearing this item on February the 7th. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great, thank you. So I just want to give you advance notice. If you are here to speak on that item, thank you for coming, but I did want to let you know we will not be hearing that item this evening. Other than that, do we have any other changes to the agenda as it stands right now? If not, I'll move to approve it, or second it, rather.
Moved by Commissioner Bass, seconded by Chair Jones.
Thank you. Item 5 is approval of the minutes. We're being asked to approve the draft minutes of November 15th and our December 6th meetings. I believe there is a change. Would you like to read that into the record?
Actually, yes. Okay, well, we got it as a unanimous vote. Thank you. Staff actually has a change on the December 6th minutes on page 4. We just want to be consistent with who made the motion and who seconded it. So we want to make that moved by Chair Jones and seconded by Vice Chair Carvalero. And that's all staff has.
Great, thank you. Moving on to item 6, public comment.
Chair, can we vote on those, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. We might want to vote on that.
We
before
have
I
a
move on to
moved
public
by
comment.
Commissioner
I'm
Erickson.
obviously very excited to hear public comment tonight.
Seconded by Commissioner Bass. And the minutes are amended. It's approved.
Thank you. Lest I get ahead of myself again, item 6 is public comment. David, do we have any public speakers?
We have one, George Biorski.
Great, thank you. Again, just as a matter of course, when you come up to the podium, please do state your name and city of residence. You will have 3 minutes to speak.
Good evening, Commissioners. George Briarski, resident of WeHo. I had just a couple of thoughts from the materials for this evening. One, I've always had a hard time exactly pegging what the meaning of market rate housing is. And under item 10A, the zoning text amendment on page 4, there's something that clarified things for me. It's just a part sentence, and it reads, the market rate, paren, non-affordable, close paren, dwelling units. So now I get a better sense of where we're at, despite no benefit to the current residents and citizens of the city, and in no way meeting the aims of the state, we remain sort of a beacon, proudly flying the flag of non-affordable housing. And a second thought, which I got from item 10C, but in no way commenting on the exterior design of the building, which under the rendering of the north face is like a concrete conga line, ba-doom, 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 and then goes downhill from there, and in no way raising the question of how the hell is it possible that in my neighborhood community, zoned R3, all these four-story buildings keep going up. The real point, and this appears in every set of papers for approval of a building, and in this case, A03. And after I enlarged it a few times, it's the summary of shading diagrams. And there's a lot of stuff in there that I didn't know of before, including that during the summer solstice, the sun rapidly sweeps from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. But there's also this quote: "There is no doubt that going from a one-story building to a four-story building," this is paraphrase, will impact the south-facing walls of the building to the north. Semicolon, this is to be expected. And it was an illumination. It was like, dummy, I should have read all these things before. For all of the 3- and 4-story buildings going up, for my friends and neighbors, this is going to be the thing to be expected. Light turning to shadow.
Thank you, Mr. Boyarsky.
You're welcome.
Item 7 is our director's report.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners, and Happy New Year. My name's John Kehoe, Interim Director for Planning and Development Services. I had two things I wanted to announce tonight. One is to announce about the item that's on the City Council agenda on Tuesday. So the City Council meeting is moved to a Tuesday because of the Martin Luther King holiday. So on that agenda, there's going to be, we've grouped together several zone text amendments that the Planning Commission has reviewed and make recommendations on, and that's going to be item 3C on that agenda, and that's going to include the changes in the zoning ordinance for water-efficient landscaping, bicycle parking and facilities, public noticing, clarification of affordable housing fees, and cleanup of department names and directors' names, so that we're grouping all those together on the City Council agenda for next week. Also, I've been asked to make an announcement for the Housing Division regarding their annual community conversations on housing. And the city hosts 2 community conversations on housing each year to share information on affordable housing programs and to listen to communities' thoughts about how current programs and meeting housing needs and ideas for other ways the city can provide support. We have 2 meetings coming up. One meeting is on Wednesday, January 23rd at 7 p.m. at the West Hollywood Library Community Meeting Room, and the other meeting is on Tuesday, January 29th at 7 p.m. at Plummer Park in Community Center Rooms 5 and 6. And that is all I have to announce tonight.
Any questions for Mr. Kehoe?
Yes. Just the update on the surveying.
Sure. So we did a RFP. What the commissioner is asking about is a while back, there's an issue about the 500-foot notice and the accuracy of those notices. So we did a RFP for consultants to provide that. We're reviewing those. One thing that's taking place currently at the state is they're modifying some of the criteria regarding the zone and the radius. So it might be 500 feet and might now also include a 1,000-foot radius. And so that's going to cause the cost of the surveys to go up. So we're looking at that and seeing whether or not if the state is actually going to pass that. But we have the contract, we don't have a contract, but we've selected a vendor, and we're just deciding whether or not we're going to be able to go with a smaller amount of money with it or have to go with a 1,000-foot radius. So that's in the works, hopefully.
When would that state, is that
We
projected to be voted on?
we can check with the city attorney, and I'm not sure if she knows that information right now.
It's my understanding that the state may be approving amendments to the FPPC regulations later this month. And so we're kind of seeing if that happens in the next few weeks to determine which amount of the contract to enter into.
Okay, because it's my understanding that this is, the project in question is due back early March?
It probably is, yes. We can check on that.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Item 8 is items from commissioners. Mr. Erickson.
I feel like I'm the only one with ever anything to say.
You're not the only one tonight.
Okay. Well, as everyone knows, Saturday is the Women's March. I hope everyone will come downtown and join probably 500,000 people again in marching in solidarity for women's rights. I'll be there. I'm one of the organizers. I've been organizing it since its beginning. I don't know why I do it because it's a lot of stress, but it's for a great cause. So I hope everyone comes down, use public transportation. And then I just have to give a personal privilege, a shout out to my friend Lisa, who's watching, because there's nothing better to do on a Thursday night than watch local access television on WehoTV.org. So I have to do that because she told me she was watching. So.
Thank you.
Commissioner
Bass?
Erickson, my grandmother watches as well from Utah, so hello to Nanny.
Any other comments from commissioners? I have actually not so much an item, I guess it's a question for staff. I was recently approached by a member of the community who had asked about the status of the housing handout that we were going to have at the counter at City Hall. What is status on that right now?
I don't have that information. It looks like it's being discussed. We'll get you an update later.
Okay, great, thank you. Anyone else? We can follow up on that near the end of the meeting. All right. Item 9 is our consent calendar. We have none. Item 10A, we will just get right into our first public hearing. This is a zone text amendment for dwelling unit clarifying definitions, and I will hand things over to Rachel Diamond to give us our presentation.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Rachel Diamond. I'm a senior planner in the Long Range Planning Division at the city. And tonight before you, you have a zone text amendment related to the definition and regulations regarding dwelling units within the city of West Hollywood. The reason that this zone text amendment is being proposed at this time is related to a zoning interpretation for 8500 Sunset. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background so you can kind of follow with me how we got here today. So in 1999, a development agreement was approved for 8500 Sunset and ultimately amended and restated in 2005 to the approved project as is built today. There were a number of amendments in 2012 that included a reference that would allow these units, the dwelling units that were constructed on the site, to be utilized as apartments and not only condominiums as originally proposed. In January of 2017, the middle parcel, which is 8500 Sunset, now known as AKA West Hollywood, received a certificate of occupancy. Ultimately, the city worked with the developer to understand what was exactly occurring on site with these dwelling units. At that time, it was what was being proposed to be done with the dwelling units on the site. So ultimately, in November 2017, a zoning ordinance interpretation was issued by the director, John Kehoe, regarding the proposed use of 8500 Sunset, or AKA West Hollywood, specifically as it relates to the use of those dwelling units. And so in December of 2017, that interpretation was appealed to the Planning Commission, and this board in April of last year upheld that interpretation and effectively reissued the interpretation. Ultimately, that action by the Planning Commission in April was appealed by the appellants, And that item went to City Council last September of 2018, and ultimately the same as the Planning Commission determination, the City Council upheld that interpretation. And effectively, that interpretation had three key pieces to it. And the first is really the one that we're concentrating on today, which is that the units were not being rented on a long-term basis. As part of that project, the units were being rented for 30 days or more, and ultimately after evaluating definitions including transitional housing, emergency shelter, congregate care facilities, and supportive housing, the interpretation included a determination that the term long-term, which is utilized within the definition of dwelling unit, is considered to be 1 year or more. And that's truly the crux of why we're here today. But in addition, just to go over it, the interpretation also included that that project itself was operating as a hotel, and it was also in contravention of their not only development agreement, but it was not contemplated in their environmental impact report or their statement of overriding considerations, which was part of their approval. So essentially what we're doing now is we're trying to align the zoning ordinance with the interpretation that was issued last year. And in order to do so, we do need a zone text amendment. The rules for interpretation in the zoning ordinance do lend themselves to this action in that they suggest that when there does need to be legal clarification within the zoning ordinance, that a zoning interpretation, once adopted, is followed up by a zone text amendment. Initially, this action would have occurred about a year ago, but essentially the appeals, held us off, and we needed to make sure that the appeal process ran its course within the city before coming back with a zone text amendment. So here we are. We are now trying to basically take what the zoning interpretation says, which was approved and essentially is law today, but have it match our actual rule books. So there's very few changes that are being made, specifically an amended definition and a new additional regulation section related to dwelling units. And effectively, the key piece is that any dwelling unit approved after May 1st, 2001, if rented, would need to have an initial lease of at least 1 year. And the reason that we landed on May 1st, 2001 is because that is the effective date of an ordinance that was adopted that changed the definition of dwelling units to include the term long-term. Initially, when we went to long-range subcommittee, that date related to the obtaining of vested rights. So that was in our draft language that you would need to have obtained vested rights before May 1st, 2001. And as many of you know, vested rights can be a wide range of different activities. It could include, having a specific financial interest in the project that's already kind of gone to a certain place, including laying foundation and starting framing. It could include having a vesting tentative tract map, and there are a number of other ways to obtain vested rights. So it became a little bit too complicated, and the city really wanted to make sure that we had a clear and concise way that we could track to help explain to people where that cutoff date is. So we did provide a little bit of a grace period, and rather than having your vested rights on that date, we pushed it to having approval of your development permit on that date. That's something that's extremely clear to the city. We know every single project and what date they were approved, particularly as far back as 2001. Certainly can't speak to the extremely old projects, but we know those approval dates, and it's easy to clearly draw that line. And that would be, we would be able to evidence the 1-year lease through lease agreement, should there be a compliance issue. We also amended the condition of approval that would be included in any development permit that included dwelling units that would come before typically the Planning Commission, although this would also be included on administratively approved development permits and items that ultimately go to the council for approval that include a legislative aspect, like a development agreement or something that has a zone text amendment associated. So in this case, we just amended the condition of approval to reflect also that 1-year requirement. And again, this only applies to brand new units. So this wouldn't retroactively apply to anything. This would be a condition that would be added to new projects. We also made a few other changes, and rather than go through each one, we did amend the corporate housing requirements to reflect the change in dwelling units. We slightly updated the definition of domicile. We also changed the definition of hotel. Part of the issue is part of the zoning interpretation was related to the project being operated as a hotel and trying to draw a line between those two land uses. And you'll notice that there was some talk about a kind of an extended stay hotel option and an additional land use that somehow falls between hotel and dwelling unit. And that's something that we are looking into and did not want to bring back as part of this ZTA, but it's certainly something that we could come back in the future. We did a little bit of analysis just to show how many units were in the post-2001 approval, and ultimately the total number of units that would be impacted that are approved today, some still under construction, would be about 1,700 dwelling units that comprise about 6.5% of our total units within the city. Again, zoning interpretation 17-0001, which was upheld and approved by the City Council, is already legally binding today. Effectively, this zone text amendment would just align the zoning ordinance with that legally binding zoning interpretation. And that's it. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions for staff at this time? Mr. Outshul.
Rachel, do you know how many units, or approximately how many units, might fall under this had this been in effect for the last, well, since 2001? How many existing units?
Since 2001, it would be about 1,700 units.
Commissioner Buckner?
Yes, on page 7 of 8, it says that the West Hollywood Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs Committee had a meeting in which members provided staff with feedback on this item. I don't see any information as to what was the result of that meeting and what the what chamber may have information or questions that were provided on this matter. Is that available?
I can summarize. Certainly, there's someone from the chamber here. I saw Genevieve earlier, and I assume that that she'll have input as well. But when we went to the chamber, typically we don't provide summary of chamber's comments, since most of the time they come themselves to summarize. But effectively, the key pieces that I got from that meeting in terms of takeaway were that they liked the change to approval of development permit versus vesting rights, but were concerned about, imposing a one-year lease requirement for units, and were concerned about the interim, 3 to 6 month tenant within this city.
And that was basically the extent of their comments?
Generally, I think that sums up all of the, there were more than those two comments, but we generally heard the
Well, hopefully
concern.
somebody from the chamber will be here to address the commission on that. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? I have a quick question, and I apologize if I missed this on your presentation, Rachel. I was taking copious notes. But are you able to give even a ballpark estimate of the approximate percentage of units that would be affected by this in terms of the city's total rentable housing stock?
Of rentable, technically all dwelling units are rentable, so
Right, but I guess I just mean-
that are on the market right now that are actually get rented. I don't have that exact number.
Okay.
But of the total allowed, all of the units, it's 6.5%.
Okay, that's what I was getting at. Okay, thank you. Any other questions for staff at this time? No. All right, if that's the case, then I will go ahead and call up our first public speaker. Looks like we do have a number of public speakers. Again, when you come up to the podium, please state your name and city of residence, and you will have 2 minutes to speak. Our first speaker is William Delvac.
Good evening, Honorable Commissioners. William Delvac. As you may know, I represent the owner of 8500 Sunset on land use matters. The staff report and the presentation you just saw makes clear that this is in the city's mind about AKA, but what's being put before you is a law of general application that will apply to a broad range. There was more time spent on the history of this than which properties are going to be affected. Staff acknowledges that the phrase long-term basis is not defined in the code. Staff is now attempting to read into it a restrictive one-year minimum rule as part of the opposition. You probably know AKA is in litigation with the city over the interpretation, and until the court acts, there is no final determination of what the code means and says. But I'm not here tonight to talk about the interpretation. I'm here to ask you, what should the policy of the city of West Hollywood be? What makes good sense? Because the interpretation can now be changed and overruled. That's what happens when you adopt a code. You could adopt a code that says 31-day minimum is allowed for any dwelling unit. You're only being presented a choice of upholding the interpretation, and as a policy matter and as a matter of law, your range of options is much broader. The staff report suggests that certain exceptions could be made to the one-year minimum lease requirement. In fact, the policy subcommittee had a much broader discussion of the potential range of options than is presented in the staff report, including commissioners expressing a view that 1 year might not be a good policy in all instances, and I don't think the staff report reflects that committee's discussion. We're also curious as to what staff may have had in mind in discussing what's number 3 option, the third option, of a potential new rule for extended stay in corporate housing. Perhaps you could ask staff to elaborate. As I said just a moment ago, at this time, this commission and the city have the opportunity and the right to amend the code to create a policy that West Hollywood should have. I have often said that month-to-month rentals should be allowed, as they have always been, because many people in West Hollywood, both tenants and landlords, need this option. Another important factor is the zoning text amendment creates a 2-tier set of provisions, before 2001 and after 2001. Over time, this will clearly be a disincentive to the creation of new housing, including affordable housing. Finally, the list of projects to which the CTA will apply should be made public, and every owner should have the right to be heard. We respectfully ask that you create a more sensible option. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Tanner Brown, followed by Genevieve Morrow.
Hello. I am a resident of Studio City, but work here in West Hollywood as a real estate agent. Today, I am here to talk to you in opposition of this item because of rent back. If you're not familiar, a rent back is also known as a post-settlement occupancy agreement. It allows the sellers to stay in their home until a specified date past closing. After settlement, the sellers pay rent to the buyer who now owns the home. A seller might request a rent back option for a multitude of reasons, but for example, last year I had a client, not in West Hollywood, but Studio City, so Los Angeles, who was selling their home but was not able to close on their new home until the successful sale of escrow on the home that they were selling. But before they closed, they found problems during the inspection process and backed out of escrow of the new home. The seller and buyer agreed on a 6-week rent back option with the option to extend while they had time to find the new home that they would be purchasing. The passing of this item would clearly affect homeowners in West Hollywood, and in today's market where we have such low inventory contributing to the unaffordability crisis, the last thing we need is another hurdle for homeowners to cross in being able to sell their home. Thank you.
Thank you. Genevieve Morrow, followed by Ted Green.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Happy New Year. Genevieve Morrill, President, CEO of the West Hollywood Chamber of Commerce. I wasn't aware that our GAC and Chamber comments were not included in the staff reports, and that's a whole nother subject that I'll probably take up at another time because our GAC members want to be heard, and I can't always be at every meeting, so we really appreciate if they start to include. The item before you tonight is a generic citywide program which impacts over 1,700 units, as you heard, in apartments, single-family homes, and condo units. If we are merely clarifying them for purpose, if we are merely clarifying, then for what purpose? It seems we are creating a patchwork of fixes to a larger syndrome. We have heard from realtors who need several months for someone in escrow but doesn't yet have a new home, members who when moving to West Hollywood need temporary housing but may not have the means for hotels, Apartment owners who say this is restricting their leasing abilities, entertainment companies who need months for filming, and Cedars-Sinai who have patients, nurses, and traveling surgeons and employees who need housing nearby. We have vetted through our Government Affairs Committee and our board, and we oppose the ZTA as written. Is it the one project and business of the concern, or a larger issue of short-term use that is being abused and taking rental stock and impacting our hotels, which we critically need to protect? But if this is the concern, the solution would be to create an ordinance that would establish this new hybrid use, but limit it to new development only, so that existing buildings could not convert from rentals into this or some sort of boutique hotel operating illegally. Better question is, what is it that we do to fill the gap between 30 days and 1 year? Because we find that there is demonstrable need for this in-between period. Let's talk about how to continue to be a vibrant, welcoming city as opposed to the most restrictive city in California. Thank you.
Thank you. Ted Green.
Thank you very much. My name is Ted Green. I've owned and lived in a condo at 8550 Holloway Drive, West Hollywood since 2005. 8500 Sunset is a client of mine. I first moved to West Hollywood in 1995 when I signed a 6-month lease for an apartment at 1430 North Harper Avenue. Had this 1-year minimum lease policy been in place, I doubt I ever would have come to live in West Hollywood. I'll leave it to others to debate whether that would be a good thing or a bad thing. What's before you is a policy that staff has said will affect every single family home, condo building, and apartment building built in West Hollywood in the last 18 years, totaling 334 buildings. And it would affect every home built going forward. If a condo owner or a homeowner in a building 18 years old or less takes a work project somewhere else for 3 or 6 months, they would be precluded from renting out their private property during that time. Have those 900 condo owners and homeowners been notified that the city is considering eliminating their ability to rent their property for less than a year? The recent Woolsey fire is a very real and frightening example of why this proposed policy is a bad one. We have real people and real families who have suddenly and unexpectedly needed a temporary place to live while their permanent home is rebuilt. Under this policy, West Hollywood would be saying to them, you're not welcome to live in an apartment building, condo building, or single-family home less than 18 years old unless you sign a 1-year lease. Go somewhere else. Our doors are closed to you. You heard from the California Apartment Association that they have members buildings here in West Hollywood that turned away Woolsey fire victims because of this policy from City Hall. Can we stop on that for a moment? We have empty apartments in West Hollywood tonight that were turned away from fire victims because it wasn't possible for them to sign a 1-year lease. I find that embarrassing. You heard from Cedars-Sinai on their concerns this ETA would make it harder for their employees, traveling nurses, and families of patients to find the flexible lease housing they need. You heard from realtors who are concerned that ZTA, in the case of homes and condos built in the last 18 years and in the future, eliminates the leaseback option that is so important. West Hollywood would be the only city in California to adopt such an outrageous exclusionary policy, the exact opposite of the welcoming, open, progressive community our city claims to be. Please do not move this policy forward. You can't simply brush aside the real-life implications of this proposed policy you're voting on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public speakers, David?
No other public speakers.
No. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, with that, I will go ahead and close the public hearing portion of, or the public comment portion of this hearing, and we can move into additional questions for staff and discussion. Who would like to go first?
I do have one question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
For legal.
Oh.
Ms. Langer. Point of order, I guess, in the noticing requirements. A ZTA for most of us is this text change, blah, 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 blah. What are the requirements for noticing when things are going to have a specific financial impact on a particular property owner?
There's different noticing requirements based on how many properties a ZTA is going to cover, but I believe actually in this case, the reason this was continued from the last meeting was to provide written notice. Rachel can clarify to all property owners and tenants that this applied to. Is that correct?
Yes, so a notice was sent that said this zone text amendment may impact your property, and specifically stated that we're amending the definition of dwelling units and as proposed, and it went to all owners and tenants of any building that had a development permit that was applied for or approved since 2001. So it not only includes people that this would actually apply to, but people who it might apply to.
So that went above and beyond the minimum requirements, but in order to respond to the public comment.
Thank you.
provide that information.
Just a quick question for the city attorney. As a point of order, typically we would announce any disclosures. In this case, would there be any disclosures? Or is there anything that anybody wants to disclose?
I met with a representative who spoke very eloquently, Ted Green, but he's a representative AKA, so I wanted to make sure that's on the record.
And
I don't know in what capacity he was meeting with me with, but I met with him.
Commissioner Altshuler?
I had a conversation with Mr. Green, who had requested that we have a meeting, and I told him that my position was, since it was in litigation between his client and the city, that I didn't want to go into just a one-on-one meeting, and it's a matter of semantics, and that was why I didn't want to go. But I thoroughly respect and understand his position. I didn't say that, but I'm saying that now.
Commissioner Buckner?
yes, I also spoke with Mr. Green on the phone. We did not discuss the litigation at all. We were discussing the ZTA issue and impact on homeowners, basically the same thing that comes up in our staff report.
Just for the, go ahead, Commissioner Bass, I'm sorry. No, please go ahead.
No. I also met with Mr. Green, and in addition, I had an email conversation with Genevieve from the Chamber about the Government Affairs Committee's opinion on this.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, I did not speak about any pending litigation, but specifically about the ZTA before us today.
Thank you. Commissioner Hoopengarner?
Yes, I spoke with Mr. Green on the phone. I took the call thinking it was from a citizen, and I found out halfway through it was as a representative, so the call had different coloring based upon that. I did not speak about any of the litigation.
Commissioner Caballero? No. I just want to note that Mr. Green did reach out to me via the Secretary Gillig requesting a meeting, and I just declined to meet with him given that the city is there's litigation pending with the owners of 8500. So we've gotten that out of the way. Go ahead, Commissioner Altshuler.
I think there's certain language in the proposed amendment that is troubling. One of those phrases is that whoever is renting would not be using it as their domicile or primary domicile. And I don't think people who own real estate should have their hands tied in renting only to people who are going to use it as their primary domicile. I have two domiciles that I don't use as my primary domicile, and I do rent them out. They're not in West Hollywood. I do have one in West Hollywood that is not my primary domicile that I also rent out. However, it was built before 2001, and it is currently on a 2-year lease. However, there's no shortage of luxury housing in West Hollywood, and one of the things that moved me the most that I related to was the letter from the CEO of Cedars that talked about families and patients that come to town for treatment at Cedars and have the necessity of staying for months and months at a time or weeks and weeks at a time and go out and seek temporary housing from people like our friends and neighbors who happen to own duplexes, fourplexes, 10 units, 12 units, all through the town. And as a person who is an active participant for 12 or so years in the Cedars Cardiac Rehabilitation Program, I have met dozens of these people who talk about the wonderfully adequate accommodations that they're occupying as month-to-month rental people when they're from all over the United States and in fact all over the world. And I think denying that to the owners of the property and denying that to the people who come here for Cedar services or any services is not appropriate. I think people who come here from all parts of the world to put their toe in the water of our sensational opportunities in the entertainment business, it's not appropriate to prevent these people from renting at a whatever reasonable rental they can negotiate property as not their primary domicile for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. I don't think that this CTA is going to resolve in any way the situation that is presently under litigation. So, and I think that if you want to distinguish between extended stay hotels and a 10-unit apartment building on Havenhurst, you can do so by talking about services and a myriad of other distinguishing features between extended stay hotels and typical apartment buildings. So I'm not in favor of this amendment.
Thank you, Commissioner Altschul. I don't usually do this. I usually ask to speak last. But I would like to give some context to the kind of the discussion that we're having here tonight, because we've received a good amount of correspondence about this item from the community, some of which was referenced by the people who came out to speak tonight. And I just, again, want to provide kind of an architecture for what we are being asked to do tonight and the architecture for our kind of consideration as it stands this evening. So in conversation with our city attorney, Lauren Langer, who's here tonight, and I may lean on you a little bit in the coming moments, but it's my understanding that following an interpretation such as the one that was issued by the director, we are required as a city by law to codify that language. This ZTA constitutes that codification. So we are not necessarily being asked to make new policy tonight. We are being asked to clarify what the city's policy has been. And I'd like staff to check me on this. Planning Commission and City Council both voted unanimously to uphold the director's interpretation. Is that correct? Were there any dissenting votes? We don't need to call out names. I'm just wondering about.
It was not unanimous at council. I believe it was 6-1.
Say louder, please.
I believe it was not unanimous at council. It was unanimous before the planning commission.
Okay, thank you. So in my mind, this CTA clarifies the code, what the code has always been. It doesn't preclude us being able to explore other kinds of housing going in the city going forward. And I'm open to conversation on this, and I certainly don't want to stymie conversation about this because there are very real concerns that are being surfaced here. But as it stands right now, I personally don't know that I feel comfortable making kind of sweeping new changes tonight. I'd rather we as a city approach that in a more kind of calculated and methodical way. So, and again, I'm not going to make a motion on anything because I'd like to kind of ask everyone for us to discuss this as a discretionary body, but I just want to kind of set this up not just for us, but for public benefit, so that there's understanding about how we're thinking about this.
Okay.
Commissioner Caballero.
Yep. So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions. I am in favor of clarifying the definition. However, based on the comments that were made and my understanding of vacation rentals, where do we stand with that right now? As I understood, where we last left off, someone who owns a residence can rent their home for any specific duration of time, correct?
No. So what came out of the short-term rental ban was ultimately an allowance of what's called home sharing. So the only way that you can rent for less than 30 days would be that you are occupying your unit and reside
hours,
there and
yeah.
renting out a portion of your unit.
So the scenario where someone goes out of town for 3 months for a job and they rent out their home is not possible?
So it is possible under certain circumstances. So if you were if your unit was approved prior to May 1st, assuming that this was approved, let's say, if your unit was approved prior to May 1st, 2001, you would be able to rent your unit for that time frame. It couldn't be for less than 30 days, though.
Okay, but it could be anything 30 days plus. So we're not completely knocking out that possibility, only for the units after 2001.
Right, which comprise of 6.5% of total dwelling units in the city, effectively.
Because that's my concern. I don't want to knock that possibility out for the community because we understand how important it is. So I just want to understand that we're not completely overriding that possibility. And it sounds like we can still have those situations in the city, even if we clarify this definition.
Exactly. And then in addition, and I know a few other commissioners asked about it, you are allowed to rent a hotel room effectively for more than 30 days. Typically, hotels are available for less than 30, but we do have a number of people who live in hotels as well for, that interim time frame.
Yeah, but I guess at that point, it's a cost issue, cost of a hotel versus cost of a guest house or, yeah. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
So could you answer how you envision to police this? So if you have an individual in a home that was permitted in June of 2001, and they get a gig and they fly off to Vancouver for 6 months and they rent out their home, how is the city proposed to know about this, enforce this, track this?
Before we even get to the police power, I think the key aspect of this, moving forward, should this pass, is education of those people. So making sure that people understand. Is that? Okay. So educating people so that they understand what the rules are. So really reaching out and making sure that we start with that rather than just jumping into, the stick versus the carrot. So I think that once we do that, we work with code compliance to, I think, follow up with the people that we're concerned about. I think there are some obvious buildings that have, both one-year leases and month-to-month leases, and working with them. And again, not taking them to court, but making sure to educate them and help them understand. Generally, our code compliance is complaint-based within this city. So the reality is there are a lot of units and we do have other things happening. So I envision that, once we do an educational campaign, that it would revert more to a complaint-based system, which is similarly, how we've taken other issues in the past. It tends to be fairly effective. If you've ever lived next to someone with a very short-term lease, you know what's happening next door to you, and neighbors love to let us know what's happening, so.
Well, I'm particularly questioning the single-family homes and the condominiums, where you have the actual homeowner renting out their home space, and those homes turn over, and it's still subject to the same permit time frame, but now it's on its third owner since you did this outreach program. And how do you propose to keep the ongoing outreach? I mean, I guess I haven't come down on this one way or another, but I'm reluctant to put together a zoning ordinance that's completely unenforceable and untrackable. And so I'd kind of like some guidance from city staff as to how that might happen, short of someone squealing on their neighbor. I don't put it in the same boat as a noise ordinance where, that's code enforcement's job is to come and, stop the party at 3 a.m. It's not the same as you ratting out your neighbor because they went to Vancouver for 6 months and rented out their house. In fact, you probably don't even know that that's a rule, so you wouldn't even do it. So these are my concerns.
I just want to follow up before we get into further conversation on that specific issue, because if there's one thing I've noticed since the Airbnb issue that's still ongoing in the city is the lack of enforcement and the actual problems that has been causing for apartment owners, people all over the city, and the enforcement's not even there for that. And the city's had some very public issues and hearings and council meetings where Airbnb has been front and center, but there is still that educational campaign where like you educate the 5%, like the individuals here in the tonight, and hopefully going forward, but then there's the 95% of the people that are living their lives because, well, they have jobs or they're in Vancouver, as Commissioner Hoopengardner said. And so how is this policed, right? So I'm concerned about just the policing of the Airbnb short-term housing issue that's causing an affordable housing crisis. I mean, there's an affordable housing crisis for many reasons. Also, segue, if you're an apartment association, maybe on your email signature, don't have no on Prop 10 on there. I don't know if any other my fellow commissioners caught that, but I'm just saying it wasn't in the written communication, but it was in the electronic one. So talking about affordable housing crisis, and then you have a no on a prop that was supposed to, whatever your issue on that is increase the housing crisis. So anywho, but I'm saying, how are you gonna then take this next step and enforce this when there's already a lack of enforcement with the Airbnb issue in the city? And we're a small city. So those are my comments. I'm still, like Commissioner Hoopengardner, I think fellow other commissioners, percolating on the best course of action.
Excuse me.
I'd like to ask the city attorney a question. Is there any state law, either current, pending, or whatever the case might be, that defines what a short-term rental is not? Like, we know that a short-term, like the point of discussion here is not what a short-term rental is. We know that. It's something that's 30 days or less, correct? So what we upheld was an interpretation that listed long-term housing as being a year long, correct?
I think that's exactly right, that the exercise through this interpretation process and now this zone text amendment is to articulate what long-term means. That's what the gap, or that's where the interpretation was needed in the code, because we use this term and it didn't have a definition. So rather than focusing on all these other issues, the point of the text amendment is to try and explain what permanence means. What does long-term mean? What do we mean when we really think of a dwelling unit? That's what's trying to be codified here, and it's difficult, it's tricky. The language, it's a really hard concept to articulate, and so this is, staff's best effort at trying to articulate what do we mean when we mean long-term housing. And so that's what's proposed here.
Are there any reference points in terms of state law or court case precedent that would help inform our decision here?
Not that I'm aware of, and I think that's why this has been such a challenging issue, is because we're dealing with new types of housing and new types of land uses, and that's why it's been a challenging issue throughout. So the zone text amendment is the best attempt that staff could come up with to try and articulate what long-term means.
And to my mind, this issue is really two issues. It is, in fact, a definition of a dwelling unit separate and apart from a definition of long-term. Now, once we define a dwelling unit, then we are talking about what is the length of stay in said dwelling unit, but I think there's other considerations that define a dwelling unit, and how do you differentiate between a hotel unit and a dwelling unit? And I think, to me, that's where some of this seems a little conflated and intertwined, and it really has to be teased apart, and the dwelling unit defined separate and apart from the long-term. And I don't have the answer, I just have the questions at this point. But I think, and that's also what we talked about at long range, and that wasn't really, I think, articulated well in the staff report, that they are different subjects. And it was what came up in the AKA hearings, et cetera. Is this a hotel or a dwelling unit? Now, the lease term became a part of that conversation, but what is the definition of a dwelling unit?
Just to be clear again, and I want to hit this home because I want to be clear about what we're being asked to do here tonight. This is not just semantics. So again, in reading the staff report, it says, and I quote, this is page 7 of 8, under Planning Commission Long Range Subcommittee, the interpretation adopted by Planning Commission and City Council already established long-term as 1 year. That's indisputable, correct? And we're required as a city, as per state law, to codify director's interpretation that has been upheld, correct?
Local law. It's the West Hollywood Municipal Code that says once you go through the whole interpretation process, it should be followed up as soon as possible with a code amendment to implement it.
Okay.
But not state requirement.
It's not a state requirement, it's our local
But it's
process.
our local
Because our
requirement.
interpretation process is a
Right.
local process.
We're thereby adhering to our own law. To me, that makes it
18
very,
years late in doing this.
But this zone text amendment says right in the title, dwelling unit clarification.
right, clarification of what the code has been.
To implement that interpretation that had gone through the process.
Again, for me, this makes it very clear-cut. And it doesn't mean that there will not be implications, but it also doesn't preclude us as a city from exploring other kinds of housing. We live in a time when kind of the urban landscape is changing all the time, whether that's people working from home or new kinds of businesses opening. It doesn't preclude us from studying those, but I don't, in my view, I don't feel like that's what we're being asked to do here tonight. It's to establish what has already been our policy, not what our policy always will be.
Chair, can I weigh in?
Yes, you can.
The way I've seen this is that the zone text amendment is in fact, I'm with you in here, in that I believe that that the director was asked to make a decision and basically read between the lines of what the intent of the code was, and he did that. And then on 2 different appeals, we did that, and then the council did that, and we all said between the lines of our code, it says long-term is 1 year, and now all we're doing is taking it out from between the lines and actually putting it in writing. So in that sense, it is clear for me, and I also believe that the reason, the intent of the city when we adopted the code in 2001, was to protect the need of residents. As a city built on renters, we wanted to protect renters to be secure in their housing, and I think that's the concept behind 1 year. So. For me, that part is very clear, and I have no problem with that. But as I said in our hearing at AKA, we know what short-term is. We're defining what long-term is. But just like Goldilocks, there isn't a huge need, but there is a need. And so I think if we were to adopt a 20% of every one of these buildings could not do long-term, that we would allow, until we define another type of unit. But I'm getting tongue-tied here. Our chair said that, things are changing so quickly, and I think that if we just say 20% is excluded from this, it allows us to kind of move and just say that doesn't apply, versus if we come back with a zone text amendment that says, that always tries to define every type of housing, we will be in this situation again when something new none of us have thought of is created. So I think if we just exclude 20%, I don't think that's a magic number. I think we can debate the number, but so I would support this, to sum up, with alternatives 1 and 2. That's where I'm at the moment.
Thank you, Commissioner Bass.
Yeah, I believe that what we're really being asked to do tonight is just a ministerial task, and that is to codify something that's already being the policy and being enforced in some way or another in the city. However, I think that there's a strong need, not only in West Hollywood, but in all around Los Angeles, for some kind of short-term housing alternative. And you go for 1 and 2. I happen to think number 3 is a good option too, but those are for the future. That isn't really what we're actually tasked with for tonight. So I'm very concerned that we're doing this, and then I hope we don't just drop it, because I really believe that there is a need particularly with the fires and any number of things. I mean, there was a flood in my sister's apartment, and she had to be out of her place for over 6 months while they were renovating it. That wouldn't, she wouldn't have been able to lease here in West Hollywood. I think we're excluding a lot of people who have a need, and we have the product, if you want to call it, housing here that could be helpful to people, and I'm concerned about that. So I think right now to just codify something, I don't necessarily agree with the interpretation or disagree, but the fact is that there was an interpretation done, and there were appeals, and it looks like we're beyond the point of whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. We have to do that because that's what our own law requires us to do, is to basically codify the interpretation and move on. But I do think that this has been sort of selective, and I'm concerned about that. I think it's picked on a particular owner, and I'm concerned about it. I know there's litigation going forward, and frankly, it's going to be decided in the courts, either at the Superior Court level or the appeals or Supreme Court. Who knows how far it's going to go. But I think that right now we just need to approve the zone text amendment, and then I would like to direct staff to consider all three of these possibilities in terms of making, going forward.
Thank you.
That's a
Before I
motion.
go back on down the dais, 1 second, I do just want to point out, again, as per the staff report, it does note that 93.5% of all units, which is a little over 24,000 units, would not be subject to the new lease requirements. As it stands right now, and again, I'm getting there, I would be inclined to support Commissioner Buckner's motion, but we have other discussion I'd like to. Commissioner Hubengarner?
Yes, I'm inclined to support it as well, but I'd like to just maybe suggest a couple of amendments. That on item number 1, I would agree with Commissioner Bass to keep the straight 20% and not the 5 minimum. And I would also recommend that we look at that being a 90-day minimum. That would address the Cedars need. That would address the flooded kitchen need. That would address, I actually happen to know 2 doctors who now own homes in West Hollywood who started out renting here when they first moved here. They're now doctors in practice at one of the Cedar Medical buildings. And they actually became citizens of West Hollywood as homeowners because they were able to rent short-term here. And so I have personal experience with that sort of availability. And then the item number 2, I would ask my fellow commissioners, would you consider adding condos to that as well as single family, in as much as those are homeowners, not renters?
But wouldn't those be conditioned by CCNRs for a given condo building? I mean, that wouldn't be...
That would be whether or not they're even allowed to rent. That wouldn't necessarily speak to the term of the rental. But I can go either way on that. It's just a conversation.
Okay, I don't own a condo, so I just wondered. Did you want to make an amendment to the third item, or no?
I didn't realize there was a motion on the floor from Commissioner Buckner. So that would be just my suggestion, is that on item number 1, that the minimum be 90 days. And I think that would address many of the needs we heard about today.
Commissioner Erickson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, too, agree with Commissioner Buckner that I think that this is a straight-up exercise of codifying the code and what we are presented here. I am happy, though, that my fellow commissioners do want to explore some of these other options and making sure staff comes back with a lot of important issues that are going to come before this commission, with a lot of developments that are going to be happening, as well as new buildings that will go up in the future to be uncertain. Specifically, a lot of the commentary from the public, and I want to thank all the members of the public that took their time to come out and speak and send us emails and meet with us if you happen to, because these are all really important issues. These are all really important issues about what is the future of housing in Los Angeles County? What is the future of housing in West Hollywood? And what is the future of housing when you have primarily condos being built and not mixed-use apartment buildings? And what is the future of housing when those apartment buildings' rents are too high and no one can afford it? So you're looking into apartments throughout West Hollywood that are obviously built before 2001, like where I live. These are all really important conversations we have to have, and issues such as victims from the wildfires, of course we want to make sure that they have a place to go. Of course we want to make sure people from Cedars, the doctors, the patients, everyone have a place to live when they're going through excruciatingly difficult circumstances. However, those tug on the heartstrings for a reason, and it's because it's meant to elicit an emotional response versus the practicality. I think that's actually before us with this zone text amendment. And I'm inclined, I plan to support the motion, but I do, and I think we have a consensus on the commission that this issue needs to come back with a definition of what long-term, in whatever ways these are talking about, 6 months or whatever, because it's not going to be the same, and it might not be the same 2 years from now. And it's going to be troubling, and it's going to impact us here on the local level before it does anything. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Altschul.
I think that by the time you list all the exclusions that have been suggested, and by the time we realize how many units are being rented out in its initial stage, or their initial stage of less than a one-year lease at the present time and in the recent past, I think we could start over and do a better job of rewriting an ordinance.
Okay. Thank you. So I just want to clarify, Commissioner Caballero, do you have any additional comments? So just to clarify the motion that's on the floor right now, I want to make sure that I'm clear on this. It would be to move staff's recommendation forward to council, and in addition to this, also ask them to take to council our recommendation that staff explore these 3 options which are enumerated in the staff report. Is that correct? And do we have a general consensus here about people being comfortable with the amendments that Commissioner Hoopengarner made to those 3?
I wouldn't accept those amendments because I don't think it's appropriate. Excuse me. I would not be inclined to accept the amendments at this time because really what we're being asked to do is just deal with this particular
No, correct. But to be clear, these are alternatives that are stated in the staff report. They're not actually part of the ZTA.
They're not part of the ZTA, so they would just be recommendations that,
Correct.
that staff and council and our subcommittees, whoever needs to address these issues, that we address them.
But your motion is to recommend all 3 items?
No, the motion is to move staff's recommendation to adopt the ZTA as it is written in the resolution. And then to ask staff, in addition, to bring forward to council that we recommend that there be some kind of exploration, be it, I don't know, a study or whatever it's going to be, of these 3 alternatives that are listed in the staff report. I don't want to conflate the staff report and the ZTA. They're separate things.
So what if as part of the recommendation language, the ordinance stays the same, but we could express a statement that the Planning Commission is in support of exploring other types of housing options for the future? And so council could direct back having those conversations.
But I like these specific alternatives.
Yeah, I think all 3 of these can be explored.
The only thing I would ask the mover, I seconded the motion, so I support your motion as is, but I would ask for you to consider adding on number 2, single-family residences and accessory dwelling units. Those 3 words. ADUs in addition to single-family.
Again, those would be as alternatives to be explored. It doesn't affect the language of the ZTA.
Right, we're not
If that's
cha-
the case, I'm comfortable with that. I'm also comfortable with Commissioner Hoopengarner's comments at least being incorporated into the recommendation.
Yeah, in the
for the
recommendation.
alternatives. I'm
yes,
fine with
definitely, but not as an amendment to the
Correct.
motion.
Commissioner Erickson?
Thank you. I would just like staff to come back, though, with an outreach plan for how they plan to actually educate the West Hollywood community on this actual issue, because we're going to hear about it at this commission, or the city council's going to hear about it, and then they're going to say, I never knew that X happened, and it elicits more concern, and obviously people have the right to be concerned about what they can and cannot do in their own home that they own. But I think you need to staff, and I don't know what it looks like, because needs to come back with a very comprehensive educational outreach program, very much like the housing blocks program that the rent stabilization department does quarterly, and make sure that the city knows, because very few people in this city even vote, let alone are engaged on some issues. And we need to make sure that those people are the people we're reaching.
And whatever the conversation is about education, it should talk about what the consequences are going to be to people who violate this amendment, because enforceability, I think, is a real issue. I don't know how we're going to do it.
Right, but we can also leave some of that for council to deal with, can we not?
So,
Go ahead.
so do you want to add one sentence to the resolution that says the Planning Commission also supports exploring alternative housing policy options, including 1, 2, and 3 in the staff report, and recommends an education and enforcement component of this?
That's correct.
We could do that.
But I would include Adam's ADU comment in number 2 and my 90-day comment in number 1.
Is that acceptable to the makers of the motion?
I guess, I just think
that's fine.
we're going beyond what we're being asked to do tonight. but
Well,
if-
we can.
It's not a text amendment recommendation. It's just you're opening the door to having policy conversations in the
Right.
future.
It's an additional
about-
recommendation we're making to
It's a
council.
recommendation, but not an amendment to the
No.
actual
No, it's
zone
not an
text
amendment.
amendment.
Because those would all require more public hearings and
Exactly.
more text amendments.
Right, we're not proposing any amendments to the ZTA, to be clear. This is just what we're actually moving forward for council's consideration.
Agreed.
All right. Lauren, do you want to read this back, or are we all in agreement and we feel we can call the question?
Yeah, I think we would just add a sentence to section 11 of the resolution that says, the Planning Commission also supports exploring alternative housing policy options in the future, including alternatives 1, 2, and 3 in the staff report, which would reflect the 90-day change to 1 and the ADU addition to 2, and for the council to explore education and enforcement options of the text amendment.
Thank you. And with that, I think we can call the question.
And the motion passes unanimously. There is no appeal process.
No.
This is a recommendation to City Council.
No.
The sixth one.
It wasn't unanimous, Mr. Secretary.
I'm sorry. Commissioner Elchild voting no. All others voting yes.
Therefore, it's not unanimous. It's 6-1.
All right, I'm going to just call quick, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and call us back to order. We will move on to our next public hearing, which is item 10B, 1342 North Hayworth Avenue, excuse me. And I will turn this over to Roger Rath, our assistant planner on this.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Roger Rath. I am the assistant planner here at the City of West Hollywood. The item before you today is a request for the subdivision of an existing 4-story, 16-unit multifamily building over the subterranean parking in into a common interest development or condominium. The 15,217 square foot site is located at 1342 Hayworth Avenue, north of Fountain Avenue. Approval of the application will allow the development to be subdivided into multiple ownerships. The item tonight is for the subdivision request only. Pursuant to the state law, all subdivision application must be reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission at a public hearing after making the required findings. Since the development was approved in 2008, the development itself, including development standards and designs, are not before you this evening. It is staff assessment that the subdivision of this building would not be detrimental to the public welfare and not impede implementation of the general plan, nor the purpose or intent of the provision of the zoning ordinance. Therefore, staff recommends that the commission approve the subdivision request, subject to the finding and conditions of approval set forth in the draft resolutions. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, that concludes my presentation. And the applicant is here in the audience if you have any questions as well.
Great, but before that, do we have any questions for staff at this time? No? Okay. Would the applicant like to give a presentation? You're certainly welcome to speak. You have 10 minutes, should you want it.
Hi, my name is Mike DeBelco. I'm basically here to answer questions that you might have. There's really not much more to say than Roger's already said. It's an existing building. Was finished 2 years ago. At the time, even though it was entitled as a condominium project, we decided to turn it into an apartment building, to lease it for rent, market rent apartment building. And this action is basically to do something we should have done a couple years ago, which was to just follow through on the subdivision process, which we didn't do at the time. Because we weren't intending to sell the units. And by the way, this is really to maintain our right in the future to subdivide if we want to, but there's no immediate intent in the near future, whether it's 5 or 10 years even, to actually sell off the units. It's just really to have a placeholder to the extent it's needed down the road.
Go ahead, Commissioner Bass, no? Just to clarify, are there any affordable units in this building?
There are no affordable units. At the time when it was entitled, there was the option to pay the in lieu fee, which was paid. It was about $500,000.
And you opted for in lieu?
Pardon?
The in lieu was opted for, as opposed to
Yeah,
the
exactly.
inclusionary unit?
That option existed at the time to buy out
Sure.
the affordable unit, yes.
Okay, I just want to clarify.
All right.
Any questions for the applicant? No? Okay.
I basically prepared to make a motion to move this forward.
We need to have public comment if there are any.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I don't know that there's
Thank you.
gonna be any.
We'll call you back up. I think we
Thank
have
you,
any questions.
Commissioners.
Thank you. David, are there any public comments at this time? No. Great. So you don't have anything to rebut. I'm going to go ahead then and close the public comment portion of the hearing. Do we have any discussion on this particular item? Do we have any additional questions for staff?
No, only it was in the past where the item would come before the commission. We would basically vote on the design as well as the track map. But now these hearings are done at the director's level. And when it comes to commission, it's just by matter of law that a commission has to approve the track map. So it's sort of ministerial as well. So I've made a motion to
But my understanding of that is, this is actually, building has already been constructed and it is occupied as opposed to something else that would be presented to us for design review.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's already, they didn't do it 2 years ago when they could have. They just, so this is just cleaning up for them.
Any items for discussion, or do we have a motion on the floor? And it looks like we do, and that question is beginning to be called. So why don't we go with the person who made the motion? Would you like to state it?
I move, my motion is to approve staff recommendation of the subdivision permit as conditioned in the draft resolution number PC 19-1307.
Sorry, so I didn't mean to put you on blast. And it looks like this has been seconded by Commissioner Erickson. That being said, we can go ahead and finish calling the question. Looks like there's one vote miss. There we go. Great, thank you. Moving right along to our third public hearing of the evening. Item 10C is 1019 North Orange Grove Avenue. This is a public hearing to consider a request to demolish all existing buildings on site and construct a new 4-story, 9-unit apartment building over subterranean parking for the property located at the aforementioned address. And I will pass this over to Derek Purification, who is drinking water, and I feel terrible now. And I'm going to go ahead and let him finish that and move forward with his presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. The item before you is a 9-unit multifamily development located at 1019 Orange Grove Avenue. The subject site is located on the west side of Orange Grove, north of Romaine and east of Fairfax. The property is zoned R3C, which is multifamily medium density, which allows for 1 dwelling unit for every 1,210 square feet of lot area, as well as 4 stories in height. The neighboring parcels consist of residential units, or I'm sorry, residential buildings. They range from single story to 3.5 stories, which sit over either fully subterranean garages or semi-subterranean garages. The existing parcel has an existing 1-story duplex, also an illegally converted garage that was added onto the rear property. I'm sorry, the rear building, rear unit. And the 6,500 square foot lot yields 6 units as a base, and also will provide 6 market rate units, 1 very low unit, and 2 bonus market rate units for a total of 9. The setbacks go as follows. It's 21 feet for the front setback, 7 on the sides, 15 on the rear, and there are no concessions being requested by the applicant. In the subterranean garage, you'll find 9 parking spaces that serve the 9 one-bedroom units. There are 0 guest parking spaces. Both of these parking requirements are affordable housing incentives. There will be 8 standard size parking spaces and 1 van accessible space. The applicant has also provided 9 bicycle parking spaces and storage for each 9 of the units. On the first floor, you can find the entrance to the lobby right off of Orange Grove Avenue. It leads to private entrances through the corridor you can find on the north side on each floor. There is also a community gym on the first floor, as well as unit number 1, which is a 1,400 square foot unit, and it's the largest of the 9. On the second floor, units 2, 3, and 4, again, the hallway or corridor is located on the north side. You can access all floors on either the elevator located in the front or the 2 stairwells located on the northeast and northwest portions of the building. On the third floor, you'll find units 5, 6, and 7. And lastly, on the fourth floor, you'll find two larger units, units 8 and 9. The roof deck, you'll find mechanical equipment as well as future solar area. You can see that in the diagonal hashes. Also a private open space for Unit 8 only. This is a high-achieving green building, and the applicant has opted to split up the common open space of 500 square feet and disperse it throughout each unit. On the roof, you'll only find private open space just for one unit, though. Here's a rendering looking northwest from Orange Grove Avenue. And this is the front elevation. On the front elevation, you'll find the entrance to the common lobby that leads to each private door to each unit. Stairwell on the right side here in the clear glass, as well as balconies for units 4 and 7. And then on the fourth floor here is actually just a large window for unit number 9. This project is being presented to have exemplary design, and staff feels that it provides a clear hierarchy of forms with changes in materials and a series of vertical planes that step back and provide depth and shadows. The clear glass of the tower helps activate the facade, as you can see the residents using the stairs going up and down. And the design also provides clear access to the building, as I mentioned earlier, and it's well-defined and celebrated, unlike many other designs where units are typically accessed in the side yard. This is the rear elevation, or the west elevation. Here you can see a architectural feature of the stair tower on the left side, as well as balconies that access units 2, 5, and 8. The south elevation, the balconies access units 1, 3, 6, and 9. And on the north elevation here, you can see there are no balconies. However, the corridor or hallway is seen here behind this frosted glass and these full height windows, or non-operable windows. They're actually fixed. This is just another rendering looking southwest. And this is a materials board. So with these materials, you'll find throughout each elevation, the materials are provided to break up the massing on each elevation. They provide wood, wood veneer for louvers, as well as stucco and concrete. That pretty much concludes my presentation. As proposed, staff can make the findings and recommends approval of the project subject to the conditions of approval attached as Exhibit A, Resolution PC 19-1304, as well as the amended conditions provided to you in the memo that's been provided in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for staff at this time? Commissioner Hoopengarner?
Yes, Derek, thank you. I see that we have new plans here on the desk. Can you, I don't see any highlights to show what's different from the plans that we originally received, so could you point out to us what changed?
Of course. So the changes really mostly have to do with changes that were made due to changes in green building points. I would say the most major change there would be the trees that were provided. Initially, there was one tree provided in the front yard, which was a red bud, I believe. That now has since changed to a California pepper tree, and the applicant has also added 2 more in the rear yard. So that's the change to the landscaping, and as well as some notes. I know it seems like a lot of pages, but through pages A2 through A9, all that's really changed is a specific note which states motion and time-activated indoor lighting fixtures will be used. And that's pretty much it.
Commissioner Erickson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you tell me how much of this building, and this could be an approximation, is the crystal white stucco?
I don't have a calculation. Perhaps the architect may know. Maybe we can ask them.
Maybe I can just eyeball it, but is any, because I'm looking, when I was looking at the materials, so the 4 is the crystal white stucco. So what I'm gathering is a majority of this building on the exterior is this stucco material.
That's correct. The white and the gray are both stucco. The dark gray.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bass?
Yeah, I have a question about the street trees. Currently, there is a driveway at the edge of the property on the north side, and both of these trees exist with the current driveway. What is changing about the layout of the driveway on the north end that's going to require the removal of one of the street trees?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last part?
What's changing about the driveway? Is it getting wider? Is it something changing that's going to require us to remove one of the street trees when it already exists with the current layout of the driveway? I'm looking at A2, and it says existing palm tree to be removed or relocated per city arborist.
Yeah, that tree will actually be protected in place, as stated in condition 7.7.
Okay. Thank you.
Do we have additional questions for staff at this time? Commissioner Hoopengarn, oh, sorry. Commissioner Caballero, and Lynn, I'll go back to you, I'm sorry.
Great, thank you. Are you certain that 50% of the front elevation is habitable? Has that calculation been done?
Yes, so as far as it being habitable, we've, it's kind of been, I guess you can say, a policy that even a communal lobby would be considered habitable space because it does access private entrances to each unit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Hoopengarner, sorry about that.
Thank you. I have a similar question. I have another one as well, but I actually kind of went on the Google machine and researched habitable, and it requires, cooking and eating and sleeping and all of those good things. It does not include a lobby, and it doesn't include an elevator. And in particular, our code says a habitable space with a private entry. And we've had this discussion at this dais many times about the reason for that being to have eyes on the street, to have an activated front space. And so that's why I'm concerned, because we've had this conversation relating to many other projects, and it seems to be not the same application in this project as it has been throughout the other projects that we've discussed. Can you explain that distinction?
Sure, yeah. In regards to the habitable space, we've always referred to the building code for habitable space. And as far as, having an activated front elevation, because it is a communal entrance, there will be plenty of people going in and out of that entrance. So it will be activated, as well as the clear glass stair. So, and in addition to that, there's also balconies on the front elevation. So there's going to be plenty of activity going on in the front.
Okay, thank you. And that brings us to my second question, and I sent in my email a request for a breakdown of the operable windows that qualifies this applicant for their green points relating to ventilation. Because when I look at this particular plan, I don't see which of these windows are operable, and in particular, those stairwells are storefronts. They're solid storefronts, and in fact, by fire code, they can't be operable. Operable. I think Mr. Caballero can probably correct me on that or not in terms of fire code. But I can't see very many operable windows in this building. In fact, the one-bedroom windows on the one side are these skinny clerestory windows that don't appear to be operable. So where do we have those calculations and those maps? Usually in these plans, we actually have an entire page of window specs with those calculations and those designations, but I don't see that here.
Actually, in the extra plans that I provided to you under page A04, I forgot to mention that the door and window schedule was adjusted to show the number of windows. So there you can see whether they are fixed windows, operable windows, and whatnot, and also the quantity. It should be the second page in the packet.
So we have a quantity, but not a square footage or a relative percentage. And when I look at this list, 75% of them say fixed. So that is not operable, correct? The description, fixed, single hung, fixed, 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 fixed awning, fixed, fixed, casement, and fixed.
Right. As far as the operable windows, the quantity of the operable windows actually have higher numbers. So although you may see a number of, in the description, you may see a lot of lines showing fixed, those are basically because those are different sizes in fixed windows, and those counts are a little bit lower, and the ones that are actually operable have higher quantities. In addition to that, the door schedule also includes sliding doors. So those are, which are obviously also operable.
To me, if someone asserts a percentage, one would like to be able to see the percentage, and I'm not seeing that, so that's my question.
Thank you. And also just to add, this is something that we would also check within, during plan check to make sure everything is met within building code.
Okay. One last question. Can you point out to me in the basement schedule where and how the trash pickup is going to work?
Trash is actually located on the ground floor.
On the where?
It's on the ground floor, actually. You can see on page A3.
Mm-hmm.
It's accessed on the south side, right next to the gym.
Mm-hmm. And how is it accessed for pickup?
So, I mean, I can probably refer to the applicant, but from what I understand is that it'll be pulled out to the front. And it'll go through the
Manually.
Through the side, correct?
I'm seeing it's sort of like I'm looking at a parking lot and how those things are going to get turned and moved and navigate with that planter. That space appears to be actually narrower than the actual length of the bin, so it seems a technical problem to me. Turn that bin on its side and pull it out that door, it exactly fills that space. There's no room for navigation.
We can have environmental services take a look at it and make sure it meets all minimum requirements.
Any additional questions for staff at this time? I do have a question as regards the application of the term exemplary design, but I'm going to hold until after public comment to kind of get into that, because as it does regard interpretation. Before we move into public comment, are there any disclosures at this time? No?
I would like to disclose that I live within 500 feet, but I have no financial or other conflicts, so I'm going to participate in this conversation.
Thank you, Commissioner Bass. And with that, we'll move into public comment. David, do we have any speakers on this item? Oh, sorry about that. We will move into the applicant's presentation before we go into public comment. My bad. You will have 10 minutes to present. Sorry about that. Thank you for your patience.
Good evening. My name is Armin Garay. I'm representing the owners on this project. Thank you for your time. Nice to meet you. Thank you for the staff for all the hard work they did with us on this project.
Thank you. Just for the record, could you please state your city of residence?
The City of Los Angeles.
Great, thank you.
What we have over here is a 9-unit apartment building, one unit to be set aside for as an affordable unit at very low income rates. Over here, I see some of the comments you made. As far as the amount of white on the building, I think about 25 to 30% maybe. It's about the white stucco. As far as the other stuff, I really don't know much. I don't know what to say about it, but I'm here to answer any questions. I'd be glad to take any questions you guys might have and see if you can answer any concerns or questions that you might have over here.
Thank you. Question for the city attorney. Would it be most appropriate for us to ask questions of the applicant now or during the applicant's rebuttal? Does it matter?
Maybe wait till the end and
Wait.
see what issues come up. That's
Okay.
fine.
Thank you. We'll
Thank
take
you.
public comment, and then if we have any questions, you can, thank you. David, do we have any public comments? All right, well, then you are welcome to come back up and rebut. Do we have any questions for, hey, I'm just trying to follow the process here, folks, okay?
Okay.
Do we have any questions for the applicant?
I do.
Sure, Commissioner Hoopengarner?
In this particular picture right here, it's my understanding that these windows are fixed on the side of the building, based upon your plans. And I'm curious, you have these lovely planters hanging off the side of the building.
Yes.
How, is there repelling involved? How does the person planting the planters and watering the planters get to those planters?
Well, the whole story is pretty long. I mean, originally we didn't envision to have it all enclosed over there. We had wanted that corridor to have some openings on it. And we went back and forth with the fire department, and they would not allow us to have any open corridors over there. So so we ended up putting the glass and everything else. But at the end of it, we still have an opening that we can have the servicing right in front of the windows. So we can have operable windows over there. And we actually talked to Derek about it over here. So we will have an operable window over there where they can open and service the
That
plants.
corner that hangs out?
Right there,
Okay.
right in front of it, that thing will be opening a window over there that you can put a hinge on it and be able to open it for
And that will
servicing.
still meet the fire code?
Yes, that will meet the fire code.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
okay.
Commissioner Buckner.
Okay, maybe I just reread this and reread this, and I'm confused. Are you planning to take the 500 square feet of common open space and add it to the units, open space, individual open space? Is that something you're planning to do?
Yes, I mean,
So-
one of the things was, I mean, the amount of 500 square feet, I don't want to downplay the common open area, but sometimes when it gets so small over here, it really becomes, it gets wasted. I think the benefits for the individual units would be a lot better if they had the larger balconies where they can actually use the outdoor space a lot more. And they will maintain it themselves better. They will get a lot more use out of the individual private spaces, and by providing I think the average, we got like 175 feet, so which is quite an extensive amount of open areas, so they can put some seating there, some benches there, and be able to utilize it. It's a lot more utility in that larger private space than it would do for the common area that we did. So we ended up, and that was one of the things that the provision in the code that allows us to do that, so we utilize that to split it up between all the units.
Okay, but then what are we looking at here? Is this the exact design, or are we going to change the design?
Oh, no, it is what it is right now. As far as I know, all the open space is already been distributed, and each one of the
it's already
units-
distributed, because it
It's
wasn't really
already,
clear.
all the balconies and everything else is, all of them already been that.
So the specs here are the way the project's going to be
Yes,
built?
so each one of those units is already spec'd to get so much private space, and that, it's not all equal, but it is, the total of the 500 feet is already distributed between all the
Okay,
units.
I was just confused because it says
No,
you
it is
may,
already-
the
no, no, it's
language
already
was
been
you
there.
may do that, so.
No,
I
it's
wanted to make
already
sure.
been, as it is on the plan, this is already the distributed amount
Okay.
on there.
I didn't do the calculations, but I'm glad to hear that.
Trust me, Derek went through them with tooth and comb, and that you can be sure of.
I tend to agree that the individual open space is more often utilized by the tenant, the residents, than going up to a roof space that's 500 square feet or whatever.
Yes.
So,
We actually have a little gym down there, so I mean, there is some kind of a communal area where they can I think that probably get more use out of it than if you added 500 feet in a backyard or 500 feet left over that people might not even use. So as far as utility goes, and as far as person that actually has an apartment building, I see that the open spaces are not used as much unless you go to a big communities where they have 200, 300, 400 unit apartments where they have a big pool or something. But a lot of these apartment buildings, smaller ones, the open space just gets neglected and it becomes a nuisance.
Thank you for
after a while.
clarifying that. I just wanted to make sure that the plans that we were looking at included that
Yes, they are.
space.
Yes,
It
they
wasn't
are.
that clear to me. Thank you.
Commissioner Altschul?
Require a necessity for asking for a variance?
They're actually applying for green building incentives, so it's a high-achieving green building. Therefore, they can split up the common open space and disperse it amongst all the units' private open space.
Well, I understand that, but we have a requirement for 500 square feet of common open space. He just wants to eliminate it.
No, yeah, he's actually redistributing them. So he's splitting up that 500 and giving it to all the units as a green building incentive.
So is that a variance?
No, it's a green building incentive that they've applied for.
Oh, green building incentive.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions for the applicant at this time? No? All right, you can have a seat. Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to close the public comment portion of this hearing, and we can move into discussion. Sue?
Okay. One of the questions that comes up over and over again is that he's requesting exemplary design designation, and in so doing, he's asking that we waive the requirement for the additional 6-foot front setback for the second, third, and fourth floors. And again, I don't see a real clear analysis as to why this is considered an exemplary design. So perhaps staff can help me with that, because it looks pretty much like most of the other buildings.
I'll jump in on that one. Good evening, Jennifer Alkire, Senior Planner. The intent of the exemplary design waiver was to give flexibility and give creativity to designers who didn't necessarily want to do the first floor and then step back and then the rest of the building. So what we have tried to interpret it in the past is to satisfy the intent of that design aspiration to be creative and to be flexible for buildings that achieve articulation or achieve a level of design that gives us a building that isn't just a blank wall 4 stories up, that gives us a little bit something more that we were trying to achieve with that 6-foot step back. So this building with the glass there on the right side with the sort of setback facade and balconies on the left side, with differentiation in materials and textures, we feel like it achieves that intent. It articulates well. It has a good use of space and form, and so that's why we are recommending the exemplary design waiver for the 6-foot setback.
I also just want to let the commission know, we did hear you. We know that you're concerned about this, and we have been meeting on it with our contract urban designer. We expect to come back during the first quarter of this year. We do have some draft language, and so we will be back within the next couple of months to show that to you and get feedback and move forward on some more delineation on what this means.
Thank you very much, and we're looking forward to hearing about that.
Valero?
Yeah. To follow up on Commissioner Buckner's comment about exemplary design, I almost feel like we should just throw exemplary design out the window and just look at whether our residential streets are better with a flat elevation versus a terraced elevation. And or look at a particular project. Is this project better if it terraces back? Is it more or less contextual? Do we want it to be contextual? And just deal with them on a case-by-case basis. I think this whole exemplary design thing has always tripped us up, and it's kind of a waste of time.
And it's contrived.
Well, it's not being applied consistently. I think that's the crux of the issue.
And I guess
In regards to...
oops, sorry. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, in regards to the project, I actually like the project. I like aspects of the project. I like that the units are smaller. Being a proponent of micro units in our future, I think this is headed in the right direction. I like its allocation of enclosed space to open space. I like that it has more open space per unit because I think the elevation will be activated more because there's more space up front. The building is not my favorite aesthetic. It feels almost dated already, but the building has been crafted carefully, and all 4 elevations are unique, and I think that merits, its approval.
Thank you. Anyone else have comments?
Well, I have one question on the exemplary for staff, and is that exemplariness used in reference to all elevations, all sides of the building, or only the front elevation? When the waiver that's being requested is an address the 6-foot setback on the front, but the building is being called exemplary, not just the front being exemplary. So could you clarify that?
Yeah, we should be looking at the building as a whole. Yes.
Okay, thank you. My comments, this is, we've seen this kind of before, a lot of white stucco and some balconies, and it's wall to wall, pushing out every ounce of every inch of every space in this property. I find the window schedule to be very disturbing, frankly. One of our real opportunities for energy savings in this town is ventilation and creating chimneys, and chimneys by meaning heat chimneys. And I'm looking at a master bedroom on the south elevation, and a master bedroom stack that has a clerestory window that appears to be a closed window, a master bedroom that cannot open its window, which I find to be a little disturbing in a town where we do have great airflow, and the opportunity to create energy-conscious buildings is very much dependent upon that airflow. And throughout this whole elevation, I have very teeny tiny windows, most of which are closed, in a white and gray surface area. And without getting into too much of it, I mean, there don't even appear to be expansion joints at the corners of these clerestory windows where you're going to have water runoff, you're going to have leak issues. There just seems to be a lot of design issues that don't address where we want to be going in an exemplary building, to exemplar the green and how we want our community to look. And am I going to sit here and redesign the whole thing? No, but I really want to call out some of these features that I think are not exemplaring the things that we keep asking for in our green building code. And to say that this is 20% operable windows, it might, maybe, if you really push it, meet that number, but it certainly doesn't meet the intent. And I don't want to go into green, but I got to go into green here, kids, because this is the flattest, most boring landscape I've ever seen. Sorry to be so brutal, but that front yard is flat. There's no seating. There's no activation there. There's nothing to encourage what Adam and I are always talking about in terms of a place to sit and you're walking the dog and meet the neighbors. There's nothing here. There's not even a nice little wall to sit on. The trees aren't called out here. The trees that they have replaced with the red bud with that was in the original plans are actually a great choice, except for this space. The plans that they resubmitted say that it's a 30-foot tree. It's a 40-foot tree, and it's a 40-foot tree in diameter. To put 2 of those in the back and 1 in the front on a 3-foot chunk of soil over the garage is a tip and fall hazard in the end. And this particular tree is prone to root rot and all those good things if it doesn't have enough drainage, which it's not going to have in this space. So it's a last minute, add, and, you can look at it, but this landscape as itself is not even a landscape. They went and picked some plants and threw them on the design. And there's nothing to create any articulation within that space. So I haven't decided yet, but I do have some real reservations.
Commissioner Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I share and echo many of my fellow commissioners' statements. There's nothing exemplary about a building that's, although he said 25 to 30% white stucco, I would argue that it's more. And that's where my hiccup comes into it. I don't think that this building meets that exemplary design criteria, although the caveat to that argument is we don't know what that actually means, which is a problem, and I would urge staff, instead of a few months, like a couple weeks, or end of the month of February. We need to get that information back sooner rather than later, because these projects keep coming. The last project in December, we did find exemplary design. I called it extraordinary design, right? But that met those standards that I think we all agree on. And I think what I'm hearing most from my fellow commissioners is that we seem to be in agreement of what that exemplary design is, and this is not it. So I'm actually not inclined to support this. I would actually like to send it back to design review subcommittee for another reiteration, because, and I think it was Vice Chair Cavallero that said, we've seen this building before. I've seen this building before. I've probably lived in a building like this before, but that was in 2001. And I don't think it meets the standards and the design guidelines that we want for exemplary design and architecture here in the city of West Hollywood. So I'm at this moment, I'm actually not inclined to support this project.
Commissioner Caballero.
By code, every bedroom requires an egress, an opening. So there can't be any fixed windows in these bedrooms, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
By code, every bedroom needs to have an egress, typically a window. So there can't be any bedrooms with fixed windows in this project.
That's correct.
Okay, so because Commissioner Hoopengarten was concerned that you have a clear story in one of the bedrooms that is all fixed. I'm having a hard time because I don't see the window schedule doesn't match to any plan that has window numbers on it. So I can't verify it, but I know by code it's not permissible. So I just want to sort of put Commissioner Hoopengarten and myself sort of at ease that there isn't actually a bedroom with fixed windows, correct?
That's correct. All bedrooms should have, and actually not should, they do have operable windows.
Okay, and you'll
if
check
not a
that.
window, it may be a sliding door.
Yeah, and you'll check that.
That's correct. That would definitely be checked during plan check.
Okay, okay.
Commissioner Altschul.
Well, I agree with everybody who has stated that this is not subjectively exemplary design. But number one, since we don't have a definition or an outline as to what exemplary design is, I don't think we can pull that string. In addition to which, the state has mandated that whatever housing is proffered is of necessity mandated to be entitled and accepted because of the need for housing. And years ago, the theory was design is subjective, design is in the eyes of the beholder, and unless it is something that is reprehensible, there's no reason to design and no reason to deny an entitlement on the basis of one's subjective design of opinion. So I think I'm going to support this.
Well, maybe that's true. However, they're getting certain additional benefits because it's being called an exemplary design. And that's my only issue.
Getting one benefit, the ability, the lack of the requirement of setting it back 6 feet.
For second, third, and fourth floors.
Which affords them additional space.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, it would
For
be.
which there is no objective standard.
Yeah.
For me, is it a better building if we enforce the setbacks? I don't think it would be.
No, I don't think
Yeah.
it would be either. That's the only thing.
Commissioner Bass, do you have any comments? I want to give you the opportunity to speak before I weigh in.
Were you done?
Yes.
Okay. I have a tendency of stepping over, so I want to make sure I don't.
Very polite.
This exemplary design, I mean, I've only been here about a year and a half, and it seems to come up every meeting, or frequently. And I've said before that it's better than okay seems to be our standard for exemplary design, and by that standard, it meets it. I believe, and I also believe it would not be better if we set back those other floors. So I'm all right with that, but yeah, I'm not in love with the building. And I walk my dogs down that street at least 3 or 4 times a week, so I'll interact that way. I love that you're doing the bicycle storage. I think that that's a really great feature on this project, a 1-for-1, which I'm an advocate for, and I also appreciate. I think that the front yard, like the building, is a little boring, but I do appreciate that it's not walled off, and you know, the current property that is there is incredibly unwelcoming, and I think that this will change the nature of the neighborhood in a good way. I also want to thank staff actually for updating the parking rules on this project as well as the next one. I just hope that that when we approve this motion, we, as a commission, include the proposed revisions to the conditions 5.13 and 6.10. I requested those, and it's important to me. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to just weigh in quickly. So to echo some of the comments of my fellow commissioners lately, you know, there are a few ways that we are and are not allowed to consider projects for the purposes of this commission. We're not really allowed to consider interiors, but I will say that these are like the teeny tiniest living room windows I've ever seen. We're not really allowed to reject things here on the basis of design or based on state law precedent, court case precedent. Neighborhood compatibility for full-scale residential projects. But I want to say for the record that I don't know that I'd want to live in one of these units, and I'm definitely not in love with the design. I also feel like some of the comments and questions that have been put forward, I really don't feel comfortable, and I don't like being put in a position where we have to consider projects that don't have kind of all of their ducks in a row. I want to know what the project is going to look like when it is finished. That is the reason that we hear projects here. But even more than that, I'm going to take a hard line on this, and I almost never do this. I cannot make a finding that this exemplary design would apply, and maybe that's neither here nor there for the purposes of the vote, but I'm not inclined to support this project. I would rather send it back to design review and have it come back to planning. And I don't know that I can be swayed on that front. So it looks like someone has put forth a motion. Would you like to state your motion, Commissioner Hoopengarner? Unless there's further discussion. Sure, Commissioner Erickson.
This is for Lauren. Well, maybe it's a process question. So at my second meeting last year, we found a building to not meet the exemplary design standard, but instead of rejecting the building, we sent it back to the design review subcommittee. And I hear what my fellow Commissioner Alschel is saying regarding housing and subjective standards and the Accountability Act, in which we know that we need housing. So if we are not denying it by sending it back, we're just sending it back because we think that it doesn't meet certain issues that are things that always come before this, i.e. exemplary design. I'm just saying we have past precedent for what, if we were to send this back to design review subcommittee, there is past precedent for that.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a tricky situation because we're talking about somewhat of a subjective term that's been in our code for many years, and we're struggling with it at every meeting, and I think it's going to be great when we come up with some more objective criteria for that. It sounds as if tonight the commission has raised a number of different issues that that the applicant may want to reconsider in the design and look at through one more design revision of the project. I don't, you know, there's very specific findings that you have to make to deny a project, and I think it sounds like everyone on the commission is very clear about that. But there are some things related to landscape and windows and the request for the waiver of the setback and all of these different things that might be able to be resolved through some conversations with staff and maybe one more go at design review.
I would even throw on there the fact that the plans call for removing a tree that are conditions and city codes say we can't remove. So the plans even reflect that something that's not consistent there as well.
I think we need to be very clear on what those issues are.
Yes,
'Cause
that would be very helpful.
If it's the issue of the fixed window in the bedroom, that's not possible. So that issue is gone. If it's the issue of white stucco, how can we reject a building on that? The last project that we rejected wasn't even close to the level of development this project is at. So, and we've approved far inferior projects to this one. So I just offer caution with us and how we vote on this one, because I think for the most part, it may not be our aesthetic, but it is a fairly well-crafted building. All 4 elevations have been dealt with. And there is an intent here with this project that the last project that we rejected didn't have. So just want to say that.
Fair enough, and that's a fair comment. I think, in my view, it's not my intention to reject it outright, but I think there are some unanswered questions here. I personally do not feel comfortable with the amount of information that we have here, especially given some of the plan revisions that we received 3 hours before the meeting this evening, approving this without knowing, like, if there is going to be a window that's not fixable in a bedroom, it doesn't really matter if like it's possible or not. I want to see if it's going to affect the design of the building, because ultimately it's our job to approve things as they would appear to the public. That's the capacity in which we serve here.
And just for the record, we didn't reject that building. We sent it back to design review subcommittee. So just for the record, we aren't rejecting projects because
we didn't deny it.
We didn't
outright.
deny it, right? I just want to make sure we just thought that it should take another pass. And in regards to white stucco, I know it's an objective standard. I mean, I live in a white stucco building, and I'm not going ooh and ah every time I walk into my apartment, but we have seen some superior architecture come before this commission that does meet that exemplary design standard, that I think when you look at the ways in which the aesthetics that we traditionally lean towards when we all have that general agreement, like we kind of are here, we know right away, and I think it's telling that many of us feel very similar about that issue. I don't know, that's my comment.
It sounds like there's a motion on the floor at this time. Commissioner Hubengarner?
Yes. I would agree with Commissioner Cavallero that we've certainly approved worse buildings. I think that there are many things to commend this building, but I too am extremely uncomfortable with the plans, getting last-minute plan revisions, and having plans that are incomplete. And frankly, these plans, right from the get-go, I mean, they had call-outs for Los Angeles City irrigation specs on the irrigation plans on the first draft. I mean, there were a number of things that were categorically wrong with the plans when we first received them, which is one of the reasons why we have revised plans. That does not give me a great deal of comfort. Now, mind you, this is, these are not full construction documents. I understand that. But at the same time, when you're talking about a clerestory window in a master bedroom, that's not just a question of whether or not that's a fixed window, because you still, if I'm correct, even if you made that an operable window, it still wouldn't suffice to meet fire code because you couldn't exit it because it would be too high up in the air. So that to me means that the design has to change, that clerestory corner window that wraps around that south end will have to change. And that means that I do not feel that I can recommend approving this design as such, and my motion is to send it back to design review to address these specific issues, that tie to the green points in terms of the window schedule, that address this clear safety issue in the master bedroom, and I don't know what other things I haven't caught, but that's clearly one of them. And yes, it's a building and safety issue, but it becomes one that changes the design. And that's what we are here to discuss. And so that's, as such, my motion is to send it back to design review to address those issues, and I would welcome any of my fellow commissioners to amend my motion to specify specific things should they choose to support it.
Yeah, the more specific we can be in the recommendation,
Correct.
what objective things are wrong or need to be looked at or revised would be very helpful.
Correct. I would also add to Commissioner Hoopengarner's motion, as I am aligned, in addition to green points, the 50% habitable space. That needs to be clarified. I don't feel like we got an answer on that this evening, and I don't feel comfortable, given what we have, that that's been resolved.
I would concur with that. I do not feel comfortable with that interpretation because we've held other buildings to that standard. In fact, I'm sorry, I did actually wrote a note that we have an inconsistent application of that standard, and as such, I couldn't find for that because we have been inconsistent, and that would potentially subject us to a lawsuit.
Is there a time limit issue here?
No, there's been an extension of the Permit Streamlining Act a few weeks ago, so we have a little bit of time.
How much?
At least 60 days? They got a 90-day extension a few weeks ago.
90 day.
Yeah, so at least 60 days.
So we can continue this to a date certain within the 90 days?
I think it would be a date uncertain, but we'll have to bring it back within the 90 days.
I still don't hear, other than maybe the issue that the bedroom window might not be 42 inches from the floor, that I don't hear anything that necessarily triggers redesign yet. But have you checked, has anybody on staff checked those code-related issues in regards to fire egress and the placement of those windows?
Yes, so every time we get a project, it does get circulated to all of the necessary departments. Our building official did take a look at it, and everything has met code.
Okay, so...
I'm sorry, just to add more, obviously there's still the plan check process, but preliminary checking was done by our building official.
So then I would suggest that we not send it back to design review, but you go through it with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that it is code compliant. And if there is something that is not code compliant that affects the design, then it comes back to design review. Otherwise, it comes back to planning commission.
I would just add that that's our standard practice. If, when we get to plan check, we do identify things that, as Commissioner Hoopengartner said, would change the design substantially, it would always be our practice to bring it back to the commission. If it's something minor, which is, we expect that as plans are developed, that can go through. But when it's anything that would substantially change the look of the building, we would bring that back.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of that.
And to echo that statement, and to just because I'm going to be the stucco person tonight, by your own definition in the staff report on page 8, you say the design's materiality is rich with the use of woods, glass, metal, and stucco, which are used in clear hierarchical cadence of forms. So ergo, you're equating the stucco itself with the reasoning for exemplary design, and that would... that's my comment by saying, like, there's nothing exemplary about stucco, so that would make a major change to the overall design of the building if they had to do a different exterior material, sorry, right? Thank you.
I have a hard time with that one. It's like, I think if stucco is well used properly, it can be a beautiful material.
I agree. I don't see that here.
I just can't make the finding that it's exemplary design, and again, I'm just going to take a hard line on this. I just don't.
We could debate the architectural stuff forever, and that's why I go with what Chair Jones is saying.
We do have a motion with a second on the floor. Is there anything else specifically, given the motion that's currently on the floor, which is Commissioner Hoopengarner's motion?
Motion again.
Sure, but I do just want to clarify. I'm looking at the south elevation, and on the south elevation, the balconies on the wrap side are 42 inches, and that clerestory window is at least another solid foot the bottom of that clerestory window is at least another solid foot above that, which would mean that this would not meet building and safety, if this plan is correct.
So it appears that in each of those bedrooms, that clerestory window wraps around to the back on the east elevation as another window, and that window is identified on sheet A9.2 as clearly operable. Yeah, in the plan set. It's labeled west elevation, but that's the east elevation, right? That's the rear?
That doesn't have any clerestory window there.
I'm sorry?
I don't see a
The west
clerestory.
elevation doesn't have any clerestory window there.
Okay, so I guess maybe I'm confused. So you're talking about the clerestory windows on
Look at
the
A8.
left side of the south elevation? In A9.1. Right.
Are those windows on the far left? Is the bottom of that window 42 from finished floor?
So those windows may not be their egress windows. Maybe the other windows around the corner are their egress windows.
So then, yes, those look like they're within 42 inches of finished
Yes.
floor. So, and that bottom section is operable, I assume?
It would need to be, I don't know offhand, but it would need to be, and it could be configured easily to be
Right,
operable
so
on
that's
the
the
bottom
issue.
portion.
There's no way for us to resolve that in the window schedule, and we can't trust the render, so we look to you to verify
Right.
that. Yeah.
So there's not just operability, but there's a minimum diagonal dimension and area and all of this. So
Right,
that
yeah.
all gets checked in plan check, but could be configured into what's shown here as an operable and egress window.
Got it.
Commissioner Hooper-Garner, do you want to state your motion for the record? It's been seconded by Commissioner Erickson, so I just want to make sure that it's been stated for the public.
Yes, I would like to recommend that this project be sent back to design review to address the issues identified by this commission, and to make sure that the plans in fact reflect what this commission has addressed in terms of the design elements that may or may not need to be changed. The fact that we cannot determine that here seems to be part of the problem. And to Commissioner Bass's point about the trees, et cetera, I feel this is not ready for prime time, and it doesn't have to be a huge process, but I do believe this needs to go back to design review.
And Commissioner Erickson is second in this, so let's go ahead and call the question for the motion that's on the floor. All right, so it looks like we have a new motion on the floor.
I move staff's recommendation.
Oh.
I didn't see you push your button, sorry, Commissioner.
Yeah, so my motion is that if any of the changes that we've highlighted, or any of the issues that we've highlighted tonight actually do trigger design review, that it then come to design review committee. But if it doesn't, it can be handled by staff and it'll come back to planning commission.
Wait, do we have a seconder on that motion?
Yes, there was.
Well, it was
I withdrew
withdrawn.
my second.
So can we go back to the other screen, David? We need a second on this motion.
I'll second. Where do you do that?
I think, can we just verbally confirm for the record that Commissioner Altshuler has said that he would, there we go. You can second it now, John.
Okay, so
All right, here we go. All right,
next.
back to the drawing board we go. So Commissioner Bass, it sounds like you have a motion. in
I
mind.
move staff's recommendation.
I'm sorry, for the record, could someone state what the last motion just was? Because I thought, now I'm confused, because I thought Commissioner Bass, well, he originally made the motion, we took it back. Commissioner Altshuler then made the motion and someone seconded it. And isn't that what we just voted on? No. What did we just, was that your motion? Yeah. We need to, I think, because this issue is a little
Commissioner
bit
Cavaliero's motion, which
complicated.
ended up being Commissioner Altshuler's motion, was that if there were any issues that were identified by staff such that they would change the design of the building significantly, it would be brought back to Planning Commission for additional review, correct?
No, it would go
Design review.
back to design
Design
committee,
review.
and if it didn't trigger any design changes, it would come back to planning commission.
Okay.
For second vote.
And I'm moving staff's recommendation because what I heard from Mr. DeGrazio was that if there were design issues, it would be coming back to us anyway through the plan check process. So I voted no on that motion because I think that that's already the process.
But quick question, you wouldn't find design issues because you're recommending approval for the design. So in the implementation of the actual project, it would be weird for you to say, oh, whoops, we need to change the design and come back.
But if, for instance, those windows were found to not be code compliant, and in making them code compliant, it triggers a design change, then it goes to design review before it comes to planning commission.
I just have to err on the side of caution because I have to agree with Commissioner, with Chair Jones, Commissioner Hoopengardner. This project is not ready yet. It definitely needs to go back to design review subcommittee. I'm sorry, we'll probably lose this motion too, or I don't know, but I think there's been objective standards of serious issues that have been brought forth here in this meeting.
Let's call the question and find out.
I just would like to add that I agree entirely with Commissioner Jones about the habitable space with the private entry, and that's a finding I cannot make that is in our code, and this project does not comply with that.
All right, our motion is to, Commissioner Bass's motion, seconded by Commissioner Altschul, is to move staff's recommendation, excuse me. We're 3 for 3 here, folks. This might be a record. All right, back to the drawing board we go in these divisive times.
I voted yes.
It still would have been 4-3.
Yeah, all right.
David, that one showed 4-2 on our screens. What was the final vote on that one? Okay.
It was 4-3. Okay, let's try to move into a place of consensus with this. So, baseline, I would be, at this point, at this juncture, I would be inclined to support Commissioner Cavaliero's motion.
And I would agree. I can live with it if, in fact, it is, I'm serious here, design changes come back, okay? That we do not want an 8500 Sunset again, where trickle, change, oh, now we've got a whole new thing, and it hasn't been vetted by this commission.
Right, we never want a situation
May
where...
we hear the motion again?
However, if it means changing a window and it doesn't amount to a material change in the design, then it doesn't really need to be brought back to the commission.
But that's not the point.
But I think that's what we're voting on.
The point is not whether or not the window is a fixed window or a sliding window. The point is whether it's a 1.5-foot clerestory window, 5 feet up in the ceiling, versus a properly accessed window for safety and security and fire access, which means the building, the window now is significantly changed, which changed the look of the building. Okay?
I understand.
So it's a difference of conversation. It's not about the material, it's about the proportion, the space size.
And safety.
So the motion, again, is that if any of the items that we, as a commission, have concern about trigger design changes on the elevation of the building, then it goes to design review subcommittee and then comes to planning commission. If it doesn't alter the building whatsoever, it can just come directly back to planning commission.
That's the motion on the floor. Do we have...
It's an approval, or you're talking about an approval?
Okay, so
But
yeah, because
that's
if we
what I- is it
approve it, if
approved?
it doesn't make any changes, then it doesn't need to come back to the commission, it could just move forward.
Yes.
Are we comfortable with
So-
that?
Yes.
So we could just add a condition that says any, significant changes to the design come back to planning commission.
How about, since everybody's so sensitive about, how about any change to the elevation? Any elevation on either side of the building?
I think
My
it
only
needs a
concern is
little
just-
a little qualifier because there could be.
Because how do we define significant then? 50% of an elevation, 25% of an elevation?
I mean, I think staff uses their professional judgment. They have heard all the concerns that were raised tonight, and I. What'd you say?
I just think that the fact that we can't come to a clear consensus about what we're even trying to tell you in regards to what designs are being subjectively looked at here for the, Vice Chair Cavaliero's motion just prove an overall, this is the cart before the horse. It needs to go back carte blanche to design review subcommittee and come back in another time, a date on, or 90 days. This project is not ready yet. And I'm sorry, I could be the only lone vote. I cannot vote to approve this project. And especially, I would like to echo, I would never live in one of these units based on their size alone. That's very concerning.
I think I might have a solution to this. What if we continued this to a date certain to February 7th, and they could clean up a lot of the plans by then? Or at a date certain, they're just going to come back, they're going to clean up most of these things, and I think that would resolve a lot of the concerns.
I think there might be a noticing issue if we continued it to the next meeting. Would there not be?
We have too many items.
Because a lot of the things are just things written on their plans that just don't make sense. So I would move to continue this to a date certain to February 7th.
I would like to ask legal a question first, because I think that's a good solution, Adam. But I'm back to my habitable space here. And it is in our code that it is habitable, and I beg to differ with the fact that a lobby is habitable and an elevator is habitable. And we have code that we are in charge with, with enforcing and adhering to. And I'm particularly concerned because this issue has come up before, and we have sent people back to the drawing board because they did not comply with that code. And then I am very concerned that we are potentially subjected to lawsuits, but that somebody else was required, held their feet to the fire to do something that this applicant is not. And I think your two solutions are great as far as the other design issues, but that habitable space is a problem for me. And I'm charged with adhering to the zoning ordinance, and I'm not finding that that interpretation of a lobby and an elevator are habitable and have a private entry.
Well, I looked in the code, and there's no definition in the zoning code of habitable. I believe staff said they used the building code definition to make that determination. I would have to do research and look at how it's been applied in multiple projects throughout the years. Staff might know.
I
But
know
that's
for a
something
fact
that,
since I've been on commission, we have always said, no, there has to be a living unit on the front. A living unit with a bedroom and a kitchen and a private entrance, since I've been here. And so this is the first time we've ever had this situation, to my knowledge, that we've got no habitable space on the front of the unit. And I'm very concerned that we're being inconsistent in our application of our own ordinance.
I think that we've had 3-4-3 votes, and that if we continue it, I believe staff has the time to do the research on that issue, as well as they can, remove things like the comment that the tree is going to be removed in the front. So that's where my motion that I believe was still on the floor, it got removed, but my motion was to continue to February 7th.
I'd like to ask staff.
And I believe Commissioner Cavallaro.
I don't think there's any real harm to the applicant to continue it so long as they're still within the time period, and it gives them an opportunity to really maybe fix some of these things that are creating these problems for the commission. And
Does this give the applicant enough time, and does it give us enough time to notice?
well, okay, so a couple things. I think the agenda for the 7th is pretty full.
Yes, it
I
is.
think staff is recommending a date uncertain and renoticing, because what if some of these things that they're looking at result in a little change? They might need time to accomplish that. So
Right.
in this case, as long as we're within the Permit Streamlining Act deadlines, it might be more appropriate to continue to a date uncertain, knowing that we have an end date that it's going to be within the next 60 or 65 days.
I'll take staff's recommendation and amend my motion to a date uncertain.
Well, you can also continue to a date certain that's not February 7th and give them more time.
Well, I think it's more an issue of making sure that whatever changes need to be made, the applicant has sufficient time to do that, and we can't predict that from where we
And I
stand right
think,
now.
looking at the schedule, there's only one item on March the 7th.
That's a big one, though.
Well, but this is not.
If they come back with these changes and it's clearer to the commission, it should go pretty quick.
On March the 21st, there's only one item.
I'll just say for the record, I'm inclined to support continuing this to a date uncertain so that the applicant has time to make the appropriate changes. I'm fine with that. I don't love doing full hearings and then doing that, but the process is what it is, and it's a process for a reason. So I can get behind that.
I will support that.
All right, let's call the question. We all can get along, everybody.
I was really hoping it would be 4-3.
This is America. All right.
Uncertainty brings us all together.
Thank you. Hey, this is government at its best, folks, okay?
Sausage making, right?
All right. Let me give folks a moment to clear out. What we will move on to our next and final public hearing item, which is 1257 North Sweetser Avenue. This is a public hearing to consider a request to demolish 3 dwelling units in 2 buildings and construct a new 4-story, 14-unit condominium building over subterranean parking for the aforementioned property. And I will pass this over momentarily to Adrian Gallo, our acting senior planner, who will be giving the presentation for this. Also, I don't know if it's an appropriate time to do this. I just want to call out that there is some language in the staff report that indicates that we actually heard this item. We actually didn't hear it. I'll find the page that it's on. We actually did not hear it. It was continued. This is on page 3 of 12 in the staff report. It says that the application ... was originally heard by the Planning Commission at its meeting of December 7th, 2017. We actually did not hear this item. It was agendized, but it was not heard, so I just want to make sure that that's written into the record for the staff report. We will,
There you go. Ready?
take it away, Adrian.
Okay. Good evening, Chair Jones and members of the commission. I'm Adrian Gallo with the current planning division. On the screen is an aerial overview of the subject property, which is located on the west side of Sweetser Avenue, south of Fountain Avenue. This portion of Sweetser Avenue is developed with multifamily buildings of varying height from 2 to 4 stories in a range of architectural styles and periods of construction. Santa Monica Boulevard is located to the south and is fronted with properties developed with commercial uses. The proposal is a request to demolish 3 dwelling units in 2 buildings and to construct a 4-story, 14-unit condominium building with 2 exclusionary housing units and 1 level of subterranean parking. The project will be constructed with 8 one-bedroom units and 6 two-bedroom units and have an average unit size of 953 square feet. In addition, the applicant is requesting a modification for a 10% reduction in the front yard setback for the purpose of providing a sculpture element as part of the architectural design. With the inclusion of 1 low-income unit and 1 moderate-income unit, the project qualifies for a density bonus and 1 concession. The project is seeking to allow an additional story. The affordable units being provided are a 1-bedroom unit of 772 square feet and a 2-bedroom unit of 1110 square feet, which are comparable in size to the other units in the building. The project complies with all the development standards with the exception of a 10% modification to reduce the front yard setback from 18.3 to 16.5. The sculptural element does not fall under any category of the elements which are allowed to encroach, and thus for zoning purposes is counted as part of the main building. Staff believes that the 10% modification for a reduced front yard setback is reasonable in that it adds only a 1-foot 10 projection to a sculptural element which itself is only about 14 feet wide and contains no occupiable space. The project was reviewed by the Planning Commission and Design Review Subcommittee. The subcommittee responded positively to the design of the project, including breaking the development into 2 building masses and especially the central sculptural element. The subcommittee suggested minor architectural modifications to the building's south elevation and to consider border planting for the roof decks, both of which were incorporated into the revised version of the building's design. The project supports critical goals and objectives of the city's general plan and will assist the city in meeting its housing goals by providing 14 new residential units, including 1 low-income unit and 1 moderate-income unit. The project's architectural and urban design elements will enhance the streetscape along Sweetser Avenue. As proposed and as conditioned, the required findings for the project can be satisfied. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the application. After feedback was received, staff proposes to amend the following conditions in draft resolution PC 1913.08, conditions 513, 610, and eliminate 10.6. These revisions are before you. Thank you, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks very much, Adrian. Do we have any questions for staff at this time? It looks like not. Do we have any disclosures?
I spent time on the site today.
Great. Any other disclosures?
I visited the site.
Great. I also disclosed that I used to live on the street and have visited the site many times, most recently within the last 2 weeks. All right. With that, we will go ahead and give the floor to our applicant for his 10-minute initial presentation.
Good evening, members of the Commission. My name is Alan Apshes on behalf of the applicant. We'd like to thank Mr. Gallo for his work in bringing the matter before you. We've reviewed the Planning Department's staff report and recommendations and have no objection to the conditions of approval, and we would respectfully request you adopt staff's recommendation to approve the project. The design of the project in big terms is basically unchanged from the project that was presented in December 2017. And as Mr. Gallo mentioned, it was reviewed and endorsed by the Design Review Subcommittee. It's also been the subject of neighborhood meetings held by the city where no objections were raised. Originally, it was a 12-unit project, but after staff clarified the project's inclusionary requirements, the number of units in the building was increased. And as Mr. Gallo mentioned, a modification is being requested and an exemplary design finding is being requested to allow the sculptural element on the front of the building, which breaks up the building's mass and has been endorsed by the Design Review Subcommittee. By virtue of its inclusionary housing, the project has received a 10-foot, 1-story height bonus. In December 2017, a nearby resident objected to the additional height bonus and requested that the project further be set back. That resident also inquired as to whether the subject property, the existing bungalow on the subject property, should be considered a historic resource. As a result of that request, staff required the applicant to engage historic resource consultants and conduct extensive research. 2 consultants, both of whom are qualified under the Secretary's standards, prepared reports, and those reports were peer-reviewed by Robert Chattel, who's the city's consulting architectural historian. All 3 of those experts concluded that the existing bungalow at the site is not a significant historic resource. The project's undergone very extensive review over a long period of time. It complies with the city's standards, provides inclusionary housing, furthers the city's planning goals, and wouldn't result in any unmitigated environmental impacts. So we respectfully request your approval. With me tonight is Patrick Ty, who has a model that he'd like to present to you, and we also have Catherine McGee, who's our historic resources consultant, should you have questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, just for the record, so that it's read into the record, please state your name and city of residence when you come to the podium.
Hi, my name is Patrick Ty. I'm the architect. My office is in Los Angeles. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. We've worked on this project for about 3 years now. We've worked closely with staff and with Adrian. Thanks for all your help. We've met with Gwen, the urban designer, neighborhood groups. We've been to the design review subcommittee, and we feel that all of that input has made this a better project. I'll just speak quickly about the design intent. I think that's probably most useful use of my time at this point. This isn't working. Is it? Well, I can't use the clicker, so I'll just describe the model, I guess. Basically, what we wanted to do is break down the scale of the building, and the way we did that, we created two separate volumes. So the building has a separation in the middle, and that's used as a courtyard. We also wanted to create a wonderful front for the building. A lot of buildings in West Hollywood and other cities are defined by their balconies, and we wanted this project to be special. So we incorporated this sculptural element that creates a new take on a front. So the building isn't contextual in the sense that it relates to the other buildings. In fact, we wanted to make it actually different than a lot of the buildings on the street, because we feel like a lot of the buildings are starting to look the same. We have materially, we also break down the scale of the building with our use of materials, and I'll talk about those a little bit. The front piece is a reinforced fiberglass concrete panel. We also have custom laser cut, I can use this now. So about the materials. So the centerpiece is a precast concrete panel system. The railings are a custom pattern aluminum railing. The front volume is clad in cement fiberboard, and then the back volume is a different material. It's a stucco building. Parking for 20 cars is located at the lower underground subterranean. I don't know why this is working. 20 parking spaces are required, and we have 20 parking spaces. Say again? We've adjusted your time. Okay. This is the ground level, and you can see the colors denote the different units. The front of the building is habitable, as you can see, and there's an entry for the front unit off of the street. So we have that visibility at the front of the building. This is the second level, and you can see the courtyard. It separates the units, and we have a courtyard garden scheme at the courtyard. The roof contains open space for the building, and then 2 private rooftop terraces. The materials I talked about a little bit. This describes the material palette. Again, we're trying to break up the scale and the masses of the buildings with the use of the materials. The landscape palette is quite simple. We have a green element in the courtyard, a vertical green wall, and other plants that provide we feel a beautiful palette of landscape. And the rooftop terraces are also heavily landscaped. The clicker's not working again, but I think I can end my presentation at that and answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Great. I'd ask Commission to hold questions until rebuttal, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else from your team want to present, or does that constitute the end of your presentation?
Thanks.
Okay, great. Before we begin public comment, I'd like to give everyone a beat in the audience or on Commission a quick we'll say a 5-minute break to look at the model, just so that everyone has an opportunity to look at it. I don't think any of us have seen it before, so we're going to break quickly before we move into public comment, and then we'll come back up to the dais and get things moving again.
up, Lynn? Lynn, how are you holding up?
Yeah, they're good. They're very good. Thank you for asking.
Holiday greetings from
Of course you did. I always say once you meet Deborah Jones, if she likes you, you're gonna get a birthday card from her for the rest of your days. Okay.
Well, please convey my best wishes and thanks for that. I don't send holiday greetings. I used to send them by the
God, I
time it
never
got
do
up to
either.
by the time it got up to 600 because of my business. I thought, I'm not doing this
That
anymore.
quits, or you can just retire.
I did. Besides, if I sent them a note, I'd likely to say how much I miss them and would love to have them come out again. You might not.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they would love to come back out. My mom just wants tickets to see all of her kids. That was like one of her Christmas requests, so
Well,
I got her a little gift.
spending the winter in that weather.
Yeah, I know.
Every morning when I look at Good Morning America and see the map of what's going on in the Midwest, it's
Although
ridiculous.
They finally just had the first real snow of the year, and you know, they're retired now, so like they can prepare for snow, and then they like to be inside, and they have this tree that they in their backyard they named Ethel.
That's wonderful.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, what I can do, Peter, if you don't mind, like waiting literally, like, there's no public speakers on this item, is just wait like 5 more minutes. Let us ask questions of staff, and then once we close the public comment portion of the hearing, I can just ask. We have, but we haven't asked all questions of the applicant yet, so if you don't mind waiting just like 5 more minutes, and then we'll get you out of here. All right? Yeah, sure. Ready. Sure, we're not allowed to talk about it. I think we're just waiting on Commissioner Erickson. I think he's in the bathroom.
Each one is a separate franchise.
All right, so thank you for that interlude. We are going to move into public comment. David, do we have any speakers on this item? Great. With that, you don't have anything to rebut, but I would like to give Commission the opportunity to ask any questions of the applicant. Do we have any questions for the applicant at this time? Commissioner Hoopengarner? And whomever of you, whichever of you would like to I just ask that you come to the dais, or the podium, sorry.
Yes, thank you. Hi. Let's talk transformers. Now, in your renderings that I'm looking at on page, I can never find all the right pages. A15, A015, A016. It shows no transformer. Yet your model here shows a transformer, and in the garage plans, et cetera, I see a transformer. So talk to me about transformers.
Sure. Well, we have a transformer, and it's located right in front of the building.
Is this mic on?
Can you hear me? Yeah, we do have a transformer, and it is located right in front of the building, and that's a requirement. We have to have it. Yeah, it might not show up in the renderings, but it's in all the plans.
And how tall is it?
Well, the transformer is about 42 inches high.
Okay. And back to the renderings and the placement of this thing, one of the obviously big architectural features is your zigzag across the front.
Right.
And how does, if that railing is 42 inches high, then I'm assuming the transformer plus or minus is the same height as that railing?
Right. The transformer will have landscaping around it, so we'll try to conceal it with landscaping.
Okay. Number two, in your green points, you have stated that you're going to have only concrete floors, 100% concrete floors. Is that something that you intend to put in the CC&Rs as a condition? Because in order for it to be green, it would have to continue to be green, which means it would have to continue to be concrete floors.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. That's it for now. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for the applicant from commissioners? No? All right. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Caballero, go ahead.
So, a design question. What does this sort of Pan Am logo kind of detail on the front have to do with the design?
Say that again?
What does this detail on the front of the building, this swish back and forth, have to do with the overall intent of the entire design project?
What does it have to do with the entire project?
Yeah, because like the other project that we reviewed tonight, it had an intent on all 4 elevations.
Right.
For this project, to me, is reading like, if we had parking in the front, it would be a dingbat.
Mm-hmm.
All the interest is placed on the front of the building, and the rest of the building is kind of abandoned. I think you have done some great positioning of windows on the sides, but for the most part, all the interest is up front, and nothing's kind of left for the neighbors.
Right. Well, yeah, you're right. As you can see, there's 2 3-story buildings on either side.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we felt like we put our energy at the front, and we put our energy in the courtyard, because those were the areas that you would see, and those are the areas that you would experience. So the front piece is seen as almost like a organic, like a landscape piece, and then the moves in the courtyard are done with landscape. So that's how we thought of tying the two together.
And that piece doesn't work without the variance that we need for the front yard. You need a variance for that sculptural piece up front, and there's no way of making it work without that variance, correct?
Well, we could, but it would be flat. And we feel if we have the 10% modification, the 18 inches, the 18-inch thickness, we can create a much more beautiful form, because it gives us that room to play with the thickness of the piece.
If you moved it back in its current design, would the balconies not meet the required square foot count? Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners for the applicant at this time? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and close the public comment portion of the hearing. I do, because we have a special guest tonight, Mr. Peter Noonan. All of staff is special, but are there any specific questions about, as regards the inclusionary or affordable housing for this particular project? Speak now. No. Good night, Peter. Thank you.
You don't want to stay?
All right. So with that, we can move into discussion and what I hope will be lively debate about this project. Cordial debate. We're always cordial here, aren't we? Who would like to go first?
I would.
Commissioner Altschul.
I think this is a magnificent design and a very well-presented project, and I move the staff's recommendation.
Well, we know how Commissioner Buckner feels about that. We have a second. Commissioner Bass, before I move down to the right side of the dais, do you have any comments about the
I have a
project?
question about bicycle parking. I know we just updated the requirements, but there are 4 for, what, 19 units here? And I just wanted, or 14 units, I'm sorry. That meets the requirement, the bare minimum, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, yeah, the last one was 1 for 1, and this is, 1 for every 3 or 4, so I wish it was more, but if it meets the code.
Commissioner Erickson.
I just want to say that this is stucco done well. No, that's a dig. I had to. It's late. What the hell? But I agree with Commissioner Ulschel, and I believe Commissioner Buckner seconded this project. I think this is, like we have at every agenda, a definition of exemplary design. Looking forward to what that definition is, and I'm inclined, and I will be supporting the project. I'm supportive of the project.
Thank you. Commissioner Hoopengarner.
I think there's many things to commend this. I like the interior courtyard. It's a different introduction of a courtyard, but it yet nevertheless is courtyard and adds that ventilation, et cetera. The sculptural design element on the front of the building certainly adds interest. But I would agree with Commissioner Caballero that without that piece, this is pretty much a square box. And the sides of this building, per our conversation in the earlier project, the earlier project, at least the sides had some individual interest and some balconies and some things. And this particular project, the sides, frankly, have not very much to commend them. And the back has only been improved by design review, adding the metal railings to the balconies. I don't know what else could be done to these sides or in any way to create the similar sort of interest, but I pity the neighbors on the either east or west side of this. I think I have my directions right. But
north or south.
And I think that they're looking at, to Commissioner Erickson's point, a big white stucco wall and some windows. I think that one of my recommendations, should we move this forward, would be to be very clear about the conditions on that sculptural element, given as much as it's involving some intrusions into the setback and adjustments to the setback to allow it, that it's, as long as legal can make it clear to me that any changes to the design in terms of this is a sculptural element, it's not actually the design of the building, would impact and have this require this to come back. Can you help me with that?
So we would recommend that the condition just be built around that sculptural element specifically, and we'll call that out, and if any changes are made to that, that we would come back to the full commission.
Well, that and the other design elements that commend this, the cutout metal panels, et cetera, those are design elements that we are, I think, reviewing and potentially approving, at least per this motion, that should they go away or be changed, would be changing what we are viewing and thus approving. And I would certainly include that condition on the concrete floors. I would have brought it up on the last project, but I didn't because there was too much else going on. But I find it very important that if someone is going to get 5 green points for providing concrete floors in a building and not putting in any flooring or carpeting, that in fact it stay that way. Because if they get their green points for doing that, and then these are condos, the first thing that happens is the condo owner comes in and says, oh hell no, I want, Brazilian redwood, and redoes the floors, then that defeats the purpose of our green building code. So I don't know if there's a way to address that legally. That was my question for the architect.
So there's a condition which we've talked about before about the green building points. I think you could point out, I think you could say, because sometimes the list can change when it's the final approved green building list, but you could say something like, if points are awarded for concrete floors, those floors shall remain concrete. So
and it shall be in the CC&Rs, given that this is a condominium building.
Yeah.
I think those are the kinds of things that we should be paying attention to if we're truly being green. And last but not least, I want to thank staff for putting in the no invasives on the conditions, but I want to point out that there's an invasive in the plans. That's it.
Commissioner Caballero?
Yep. So I go back to exemplary design. I have a hard time classifying this one as exemplary design. Not that I don't like the project. I just, again, when I first saw this project a year or so ago, and we didn't have a chance to review it then, I was hoping that the side elevations and the rest of the building would be given as much care as the front of the building has been given. And if it had parking in front, this project would qualify perfectly as a typical dingback from the 60s, because everything is on the front. And it's not that it's not a valid move. I think it is a valid move. I'm somewhat surprised by the acceptance of the stucco box in this situation versus the last project that we made, but that's fine. I don't see the courtyard as a courtyard. It really is just leftover space. That space really isn't used like a courtyard. There's some seating out there just because there's space for seating, not because it's designed as a courtyard. So I think it's somewhat disingenuous to present it that way. All that said, I'm inclined to support the project, again, because I think it is better than most of the projects that we've seen, but I really question this exemplary design thing. And given if the exemplary design was taken away, or whichever, this building is a better building with a flat elevation, especially on this city block where it is very defined along the entire block, and it'll hold the edge. I would like to see the sculptural element go back, but I don't want to see the balconies get smaller and then not meet the, well, we can't not meet the requirement, so I'm okay with it.
Great, thank you. I would echo almost entirely Commissioner Caballero's comments about this. I am inclined to support it. There are some things I'm not in love with, but I don't think they merit enough to constitute me not supporting the project. So with that said, it looks like Commissioner Altschul's motion is to move staff's recommendation. Is that correct, Commissioner Altschul?
Yes.
And it's been seconded by Commissioner Buckner, and with that, we can call the question.
Would Commissioner Altschul be willing to include the amendments that I recommended?
Well, I think those amendments are common practice, so I don't think they need to be specifically included.
It's common practice to put the CC&Rs?
Staff.
Is that common practice?
Could we get staff's POV on that?
We can add it if you want.
I'm comfortable.
I don't think it's necessary. I think Mr. Ty's history here is completely credible. And if you drive around town and look at what he's produced, I don't think, as I say, I don't think it's necessary.
Oh, I'm not calling into question Mr. Ty's credibility. I'm calling into question what the owners of the new units are allowed to do once they
what
purchase
the owners
them.
of the units do is up to their board of directors whether or not they approve it or not, and the developer has no control over that. If I have a condominium that's built over 50 years ago, if I wanted to recommend something to do to my unit that the board approves, you can't go back to the developer and undo that.
Does staff have a POV in terms of best practices on this particular point? In my experience, we've not often conditioned things to be included in CC&Rs, but I'd be curious to hear your.
We do condition things to be in the CC&Rs from time to time, and we could add this if you, that's the opinion or the vote of the commission.
It sounds like we don't have any other commissioners who are in. I'm okay without it, but I'm open to discussion on that point. Again, we do have a motion on the floor as it stands right now. Let's go ahead and call the question.
I just want real quick clarification. When you move staff's report, does it include the recommended revisions that came in the memo tonight?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
And the motion passes unanimously. The resolutions the Planning Commission just approved memorializes the Commission's final action on this matter. This action is subject to appeal to the City Council. Appeals must be submitted within 10 calendar days from this date to the City Clerk's office. Appeals must be in writing and accompanied by the required fees. The City Clerk's office can provide appeal forms and information about waiver of fees.
Great, thank you. Please keep your voices down as you exit the room. We're not quite done with our meeting here yet. Again, item 10E, 8615 West Knoll Drive has been continued to a date certain, continued to our next meeting, which is February 7th. Moving on to item 11, new business, there is none. Item 12, unfinished business, there is none. Item 13, excluded consent calendar, there is none. Item 14A, items from staff or planning manager's update.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the question earlier regarding on a handout on the affordable housing density bonus. Unfortunately, Peter's not here, but that did get put into the development permit itself. And so that information is available. I don't know if they're planning on doing a brochure in addition to that, but the current development permit that is online does have that information in it. So it was, application that's online does have that. And that was just updated about a week ago. So it's
great.
fresh.
Okay, thanks very much. Any other updates? Mr. DeGrazia? No. All right, item 15, public comment. Do we have any public comments, David?
No.
Great. Item 16, items from commissioners. I actually have something that I'd like to say. No one else is going to speak this evening. I just, I'm not stumping. I have, no aspirations to run for elected office, but my parents were in town at this meeting about 2 months ago, and it really moved me that kind of everyone, it's like an empty room now, I have everyone on TV, that I literally announced that they were here and like everyone in the room was so warm and welcoming to them, everyone clapped, like I just couldn't have planned that, and it just really touched me, and it's kind of like our community being our best, and I just can't express to you how much I appreciated that. It reminds me of why, West Hollywood has been my home now for the entire 13 and a half years that I've lived in the state of California, and that's been very much echoed, in meetings like tonight where we may not always agree on everything, but we're able to come to a consensus, and I just really hope that this can be an example, for other people who are kind of trying to work together in these times when it just seems like sometimes nothing is getting done. So I wasn't joking. This really is government at its best.
Anyone that creates Stacey Jones deserves, a miraculous round of applause because you're amazing.
Well, we're going to take some credit here for trying to do government the way we think government is best done. So I just want to commend my fellow commissioners for, it's so easy to work with you, and it's such a pleasure to work with you, and thank you. And that's all I have to say. And unless anybody else has anything else, I will adjourn this meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry, I do. I
go ahead.
apologize. I do have a quick item. I would like to ask staff to figure out a way to, I don't know how to phrase this exactly, green points. I know it's my personal thing, and I'm sure everyone loves me for it, not, but it's important. And unfortunately, what I keep seeing is that staff seems to not be paying attention because the answer is, well, it's going to be addressed by plan check and et cetera. So they ignore it, except to the point where it actually does impact the plans. So we've had more than one instance where we've had applicants submit a green building point plan where they're taking points for 3 different kinds of roofs. It's physically impossible to have 300 square feet of roof, okay? And that impacts the points, which impacts their eligibility for things that we're voting on. Now, I get it that whether or not they wrap the pipes or whatever, that's a thing that's going to happen in plan check, but there are certain things on those green building points that absolutely are part of the design and critical to the decision making of this body. So I would like to encourage staff to take a little bit harder and closer eye to those areas where it does impact what the decision we're making is. And please give me one I can read. because the ones that we got on Orange Grove was a big blur. And with that, I would say thank you, everyone.
All right. Well, with that, unless anyone else has any further comments, without further ado, I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. We will adjourn to our regularly scheduled meeting, which is Thursday, February 7th at 6:30 p.m. right here in West Hollywood Council Chambers. We will see you there.